All right, good morning, everybody. Let's go ahead and get this shindig started. It's good to see everybody's face that's here, and I know there's a group online. Wish we were smiling at your faces as well, but certainly understand that there's work to be done elsewhere. Just keep at least one ear on us and we'll continue our work here. Before I officially, or I guess at the top of this, have two things I want to chat about real quick. One is I appreciate everybody's support last meeting when I wasn't here and their endorsement for me to stay in this role as a retiree. However, since retiring, I have come back to work. So I've come back to work at Lawrence County Water and Sewer Commission full time. I am no longer retired. I shouldn't have taken a good vacation overseas that straightened out my mind and it's like, what are you going to do? Go back to work. So I'm back to work, but it's good to be here among friends and part of this community, and it means a lot to be engaged in this. On a very sad note, talking about our community and how close it is. Unfortunately, we lost a member of our water community in Dyke Spencer this week. I've worked with Dyke for 20 plus years, and he was as good as they come. He was always an advocate for water planning, for staff training, for educating people, and just a tremendous person and a great member of our community, and he will be sorely, sorely missed. Catherine, did you want to add anything?
I just I wanted to extend my condolences to anybody who was really close to him and knew him really well. I was fortunate enough to know him in a more professional setting. He was often a stakeholder on my projects, and I just want to say that I think the thing I like most about Dyke is that he was the kind of guy that was willing to say the thing that maybe everybody was simmering on in their head, but not willing to say out loud. But he always would, even if it made people a little uncomfortable or maybe was the harder thing to say. Sorry guys, I've been super emotional about this past 24 hours. So as we embark on our second meeting where we're focusing on recommendations and thinking about creating a document that has meaning, right? That furthers water stewardship in our state. I just ask that I'm so thankful that everybody in this room has been really respectful of each other and thoughtful and already kind of willing to be the Dyke Spencers of the world and saying the hard things. So just let's continue that for the next couple meetings as we work through these recommendations, because this is where it counts, this is where it matters. And so I think today, especially if we get into some of the policy stuff, it's going to be a little hairy, but let's keep having those conversations, let's keep talking about it, let's continue to honor his legacy of keeping growing water policy and making the state better. So
Thank you, Catherine. With that said, please keep Dyke's family, Powdersville Water, and all the folks he's associated with in your thoughts. He'll be missed. So today, officially, we're here to review the comments from chapter 2 and 3. I know Catherine felt like she would write a novel on that subject, and the chair was right behind her. Receive an overview on the draft plan, chapters 4 and 8, so we can begin our work on those, and review the working draft chapter 9 and continue the discussion and development plan recommendations. I hope everybody's been looking through the recommendations. I appreciate Catherine working with the groups after hours to go over recommendations, continue that work. I would encourage groups of 2 or 3 to get together whenever possible and see what they like about the recommendations as they stand, see where we need to continue our discussions so we can have the best plan we possibly can. So with that, and you all have the agenda before you, I would accept a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion. Second.
I hear a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? The ayes have it. I would also accept a motion for approval of the June 19th minutes and summary.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Maybe I need to go back and read those a little tighter. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Those are approved. Housekeeping items and announcements. There's refreshments, help yourself. There's some sodas in the kitchen if you want. There are odd sodas. If y'all have a preference moving forward, let me know and I will get some that are more on brand. It's like, what do we have in there? It's like, ooh, Fanta. Don't see Fanta very often. Parking lot items. John, did you want to spend time going?
We need to talk about it too much. Engagement, we do need to start talking about public engagement as we get closer to public meetings and what else we want to do to supplement that. That'll be part of our discussion too when we develop our implementation plans. That'll be an important part of it.
If I can jump in on that. So this kind of came very close to home for me as Jeff was at a meeting and was talking to a couple council people and one indicated he wasn't sure what was really going on with water planning. That's right in my backyard and that hurt. So we are going to make a concerted effort to get out and speak of the program and where we stand kind of right now with the idea that we'll follow up once recommendations and look, the whole point of my going out and speaking with folks will be when it comes time for public comment. They read the document and if so moved, make a comment. I would encourage everybody in the arenas y'all walk in and talk with people about the work being done. Let them know that there will be an opportunity. Encourage them to take full advantage of that opportunity. And for nothing else, just in the public comment to say job well done or thanks for the effort or something like that. So there's an appreciation for the work that y'all have done and that we are coming up with the best plan possible.
Item 5 on this housekeeping part of items is funding for implementation. I mentioned that because Georgia has a seed grant program. You know, they have a more mature water planning process that's been going on for more than a decade. And as part of that, they have a seed grant to help implement activities that are identified in their regional water plans. In fact, for them to be eligible for this seed grant, they have to have been identified as a recommendation in their water plan. There's not a whole lot of money there, but there's enough money to get certain activities started. We've mentioned this in some of the other councils. The Upper Savannah River Basin Council was interested in learning more about it. And so we're trying to arrange, I forget the person's name that's in charge of the Georgia EPD, but arrange for them to give a short presentation to the Upper Savannah Council about these seed grants. My thought was, rather than ask her to do the same presentation to all the RBCs, is we'll record that. Y'all are interested in hearing that, we could play it at one of the upcoming RBC meetings. Or I can just provide some information on it. But I just mentioned that because it'll be important when we talk about ways to fund some of the activities and actions and strategies that are part of our implementation plan.
John, would you be able to share the link to their meeting if any of us wanted to get online?
Yeah.
To hear the presentation.
Sure.
Or show up in person.
Yeah. Data gaps, we're talking about that today in terms of recommendation. We may be talking about non-FERC regulated dams. We'll probably be talking about Surface Water Withdrawal Act 2, all that's ongoing. If anybody does want to do their own engagement, they need support from me, again, reach out to me, and I've got a lot of different PowerPoint slides and I can send you whatever you need. I haven't done one customized slide just yet because we're always advancing and progressing, but just let me know if you need anything. There was an idea to have Megan talk to us about water related discussions in the last legislative session. I don't know if that's still something that you want to hear from Megan about or not. Anybody have any interest in hearing from her about if she tracks that stuff or
Yes, I'd like to. I'd like to.
You'd like to hear it?
I think it'd be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, we have more than one viewpoint.
We could, yeah. Farm Bureau wants to talk about it too. I would ask her to present it. I don't know if she can, but in an unbiased format and just say this is what the legislature considered over the past session. But I see your point. We'll talk a little bit about state yield. Okay. Catherine already touched on these, but we had them up there last time since we're talking about recommendations. Remember, we have a common interest creative plan that ensures water resources will be available for all years to come, even under drought. That's the big picture. Again, try to keep away from positions and focus more on values, respect the opinions of others. So again, we're trying to strive for something you can live with. You might not be 100% behind a recommendation. Doesn't mean you can't live with it. Ideally, we'd like to have full RBC consensus on our recommendation. But again, that doesn't mean you're ready to champion it necessarily. It's just that you can live with it. And we're going to talk about how we're going to kind of group recommendations for discussion purposes in just a minute. And thank you again for your continued presence and engagement. Your group has had strong engagement, so do appreciate that. All right. Public and agency comment. Any members of the public that are present want to make comment? Or any agency comment? Or Joe?
Yeah, so I thought I'd take some time to kind of reintroduce myself and our new DES team. So I'm Joe Kuhn, Director of Water Resources within the newly formed Department of Environmental Services. And as most of you know, DHEC on July 1 was split and is no more. And two agencies came out of that, Department of Health and Department of Environmental Services. So as part of that reorganization, the two DNR programs came over. Scott Waters hydrology program joined within the Division of Water Resources, and moving forward, this program has joined Leanne's water quantity permitting program and the private well program to kind of form that new division. So Scott will continue to oversee these river basin planning efforts, and the water quantity permitting program side of the house, managed by Leanne, will continue in an advisory role through this process. So we are excited to continue our collaboration with basin planning councils and grow our relationship with this broad stakeholder network as we draft an updated state water plan. Thank you for your continued dedication to this process, and River Basin as a council member, and appreciate you giving me a few minutes this morning.
Joe?
Glad to answer any questions.
Joe, so the state climate office stayed under DNR though, correct?
That's correct.
They're still obviously part of this process as well. Is there anybody else that stayed over that is a part of this process that we should just keep in mind?
Well, the two programs that came over from DNR are the hydrology group and the aquatic nuisance species group. So the Bureau of Water over DES reorganized a bit, and they've got a new aquatic science division that kind of incorporated those folks from DNR into some current folks we had on staff. And my program reorganized a bit as well to accommodate the hydrology group.
The climate office.
Yeah, climate office stayed the same. So we still support the climate office. I sit on the DRC in an advisory role there.
So, as the switchover is coming about here, so how is the Basin Council role with the new agency? How's that gonna happen? How that will go?
Well, again, I mean, that process will continue as it was with DNR under the new DES organization.
So did the state water plan was always a DNR driven law?
Right.
I'm assuming that's still
No,
as is. or
that's with
did they-
DES now.
So that law would be tweaked the language, so that component comes to DES.
Yeah, all those necessary changes have been implemented.
Okay.
Right.
Any other questions for Joe?
Do you have any more clarity at this point about funding related to next steps, especially for those of us that pulled the 3 and the 4 out of the envelope meeting?
So the funding allocated for DNR all is transitioning over to DES.
Okay.
So those funds are in place, and you know, as most state agencies, we're looking forward to FY26 now, preparing our budget asks.
So our recommendations could have influence on that.
Yes, that would be taken under consideration, sure.
Y'all hear that? Okay, cool. Chat about it later.
Okay, before we move on, anybody on the line have a comment?
What do we have? Okay.
RBC members, we've got Devin Orr, we've got Guy Schmaltz and Jay is online too.
Paul Lewis,
Paul Lewis,
Jay Nicholson, Brett Templeton.
Julie Davis, Brett Salt.
She's the last.
Yeah. I mentioned too, I don't know if you all know Amy's here, president from Dominion Energy, in place of Eddie today. And then, sorry, there's one face in the room I don't recognize. Sorry to put you on the spot.
My name is Terrence Kelly. I am the state resource conservationist for NRCS station seated in Columbia. So my state conservation is acting right now, suggested that I attend a meeting, okay? And perhaps provide some insight on how we, as a federal agency, can provide technical or even financial assistance to the group that produces primarily. And so in the Saluda watershed, the big and little, we've probably put in that watershed somewhere around 1.5 million over the last 4 years. And so we're probably going to continue that effort through a combination of programs that we have. But it was suggested that I attend this session because we're trying to jumpstart our source water protection committee and the National Water Quality Initiative Committee. And so I believe that we do have perhaps someone in here that participates in that committee. So if you have any questions for me, that's fine, but I am the state resource conservationist working on different in English out of Columbia.
Great, well, glad to have you. Appreciate you showing up. Anybody have any questions for Terrence or NRC guy?
How do we get the money?
Well, we have a combination of grants that you can apply for, okay? But we also have signups for the Environmental Quality Incentive Program and the Conservation Steward Program, primarily for agriculture producers.
Yeah, general website.
Yes, sir. www.sc.nrcs.gov.
Did I hear you say that Ann English is back? What's yours now? Ann English, is she in back in
No,
charge?
she has not returned. The acting state conservationist is a native of South Carolina, Orangeburg. Her name is Miss Armstrong, Miss Odessa Armstrong.
I know her.
Well, you know, Odessa,
Well, she's a great person.
great person. Great person.
When we prepare chapter 10 of our river basin plan, it talks about implementation. We've got a short section about funding. We may reach out to you, kind of have you review some of the funding sources that we identified and other plans that have already been completed. But we'd like your insight to what type of programs might apply to some of the recommendations or actions that we identified. Glad you're here. Okay, let's move on. Okay, in June, we skipped July. We really focused on starting recommendations. So I've got one slide to do a recap of what we talked about in June. We reviewed the drought response recommendations. Everybody was generally comfortable with those. You're going to get another opportunity to review those, some of the language supporting the recommendations when I circulate the draft of chapter 8 after this meeting. Later this week, I'll probably send it out. That'll be your next chance to review those 4 or 5 drought response recommendations. We started talking about planning process recommendations, and I think we got pretty much through those are recommendations that you had to improve this water planning process. And then we started technical and program related recommendations, and we got a little bit into policy. So, we've got drafts of those. We started a working draft of chapter 9, which is going to house all of our recommendations except for the drought related ones. I'm going to show you those in a second. Today, we're primarily going to be discussing policy, regulatory, and legislative recommendations. We've got a lot of ideas that have been put together through individual submissions or meetings that Catherine organized. So that's going to be primarily what we talk about today. There we go. Okay. If y'all recall, back in June, I think, or maybe late May, I circulated drafts chapters 2 and 3. We did receive comments from maybe 5 or 6 different RBC members. We've started a comment log, which I've circulated. We have still not addressed every comment. In fact, if you see a blank in this comment log, that means it likely hasn't been addressed yet. Amy Shaw, who works with Kirk and I and Grace on this, took a first shot at it. I still need to go through, help address some of the comments that were not addressed yet. So that's a work in progress. The deadline I think I'd given you for submitting comments on chapters 2 and 3 long past, but if you want to still submit comments, I'm happy to take them. In fact, Phil submitted some earlier this week. You're going to be able to submit comments even, up to the draft plan when we circulate that, before we circulate to the public. So you have opportunities. I just encourage you to look at it sooner rather than later. Casey and Catherine are prolific.
Yeah, really just calling us out there.
Prolific authors, which, if you can see, they've already almost got 150 comments between the two of them, and then some from Kaylee and others. So you've almost already beat the broad for the whole panel. I don't say that as a bad thing, though. I appreciate the fact that folks are looking at it and looking at it closely. This is your plan, so I'm not trying to discourage anybody from making comments, whether they be wordsmithing or clarification or asking a question, whatever it might be. Because there's so many comments, I don't want to spend time today going through any of them, to be honest with you. So I'm not going to. I'm just making you aware that they're there, that we are tracking them. I'll continue to circulate this log as we update sections or circulate sections of the plan and get comments on sections of the plan. I want to make sure everybody understands, though, they have the ability to comment and provide comments, even if it's on chapters 2 and 3, which we've kind of already moved through that, but you can still go back and make comments if you want.
What if you say, don't see your comments up there? What if you don't see your comments in there? I mean,
Yeah. So the comments that you provided to me were more big picture and they deal with recommendations, and we're going to talk about those later today. So I didn't put them in the log, but they're incorporated in some of the recommendations for discussion. And if you feel like we missed some that should be addressed in chapters 2 and 3, we can, but yours were, again, more focused on recommendations and not the technical content in 2 and 3. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, chapters 4 and 8. Chapter 4 deals with current projected water demands. Chapter 8 is drought response. Chapter 4 is ready to be circulated. I didn't want to send it ahead of this meeting because I didn't want to distract everybody, but it's a pretty short chapter, but it summarizes the demands and demand projections that we use as part of the modeling effort. So it starts off by summarizing current water demands. We present current water demands based on sector divided by groundwater and surface water. Talks about the permitted and registered water use, those amounts. We have a map of all the permitted and registered withdrawals in the basin. There's a summary by category, percent currently in use versus percent registered and permitted. And then there's several pages that talk about the demand projection methodology that's Alex Pellet and others developed. More on the methodology, some of the information right out of Alex's reports and memos, a little discussion on each sector's demand projection methodology, and then a summary of projected water demands by year. Some graphs. Discussion of public supply demand projections, manufacturing, all the different sectors. And that's it. Pretty short chapter. Encourage you to take a look, provide comments. Again, I'll circulate that later this week. The other chapter that we will circulate is chapter 8. And this captures our drought response, drought management strategies discussion. It has an intro talking about statewide drought response. Talks about the organization of the DRC and the drought management areas. One thing that I have not yet filled in, because I want to make sure I have all the recently updated drought management plans, is a table summarizing each water utilities in the basin drought management plan. I need to fill that in before I circulate this. A little bit about roles and responsibilities. The communication plan that you all decided, which focuses on designating one liaison to provide input to the DMAs and the DRC representing the Saluda RBC. And one thing we haven't done yet is identify who that liaison is going to be. So before we finish this process, we kind of need to pick someone, be thinking about that. And then your recommendations. This is what I want you to focus on, make sure that we've got the wording correctly.
I'm looking at the one next to him.
I will point out, and Terrence, I'm going to put you on the spot. Have you ever heard of the Condition Monitoring Observer Report System that National Drought Mitigation Center operates? Yeah. And most of the RBC members were not aware of it. It's a website that the National Drought Mitigation Center operates nationwide where folks can go in, anybody can go in and provide a picture and provide comments about drought status in their area. And the point of it is to help both the state and the national drought folks have information that they need to identify drought areas and what phase they should be in, the type and severity of drought. Elliot Wickham, who I think is online, right? Yep, Elliot encouraged folks to use that, and the RBC, this RBC and other RBCs have made a recommendation in their plans to encourage more people to use that. One of the recommendations that the Saluda RBC suggested was that the NRCS promote the use of the Seymour Condition Monitoring and Observable Report System.
I had a stack of these, I just gave you one.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you, Sam. So let us know if you have any questions about it, but we're hoping to kind of spread the word and get the word out. And we thought the NRCS might be a useful organization to help do that. Okay, that's chapter 8. Again, I'll circulate that after the meeting and look for your comments. Any questions? All right, let's move on. Okay, last time we started working on recommendations, got primarily through planning process recommendations and into some technical recommendations. Let me pull up a working copy of chapter 9 and highlight some of the recommendations that we've identified already. Gonna make it a little bigger so everybody can read these. We're going to start with these planning process recommendations. The recommendations in bold, the non-bold is just kind of discussion as to why it's a recommendation and some additional information. One of the recommendations y'all talked about was potentially holding additional public meetings to enhance public engagement. I think there was actually discussion about, maybe there should be another public meeting right after the RBC forums to get the word out, kind of to introduce the RBC. I thought about that a little bit more, and because of where the planning process is, there's only one more RBC to form, the Santee, and they're likely to start work this fall. By the time your draft plan gets published, there's not going to be any new RBCs forming. They will have already had their 2 public meetings before the RBC forms, and then their RBC will be formed. So there's really not a lot of value in saying, oh, I think the planning process should incorporate a new public meeting right after the RBC forms, because there won't be any new RBCs formed. That's all what I'm saying. So I reworded a little bit and said, try to capture the thought of, I think what you're getting at is that you want to kind of get more public engagement as the process starts after the RBCs form. So I left it a little more vague and said, after the formation of each RBC, maybe you have another public meeting at a key point in the planning process to engage stakeholders and raise awareness. Comfortable with that? Would you like to do something different? You remember the discussion? Look at blank faces.
I remember the discussion. In my opinion, this is fine, but I think what matters more is how we engage the public moving forward. This is kind of new to me, but.
I agree with her.
Yeah, if you don't think just having another public meeting sometime during the process is an effective way, and you would like to generalize it to just strengthen engagement and then work on that as part of your implementation plan, what those engagement and outreach activities are, maybe that's what you do.
I think that's.
Okay. I mean, one thing we talked about too, I can't remember if it was Broad or the Edisto, was actually early in the process, developing a public engagement strategy. A deliberate strategy that says, here's what we're going to do. And you identify, conferences and boards that you want to present to. And, Patrick was just asking me, where'd Patrick go? Patrick was here. So, yeah. He was asking about, there's a rural water meeting coming up that, they were looking for someone to talk about both the Upper Savannah and the Saluda had, things like that.
What the decision makers companies in the dark.
That's just something in January.
January the 9th, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
They do it quarterly in Williams.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to this one when we work on the implementation plan. And if you have some suggestions for tweaking that, let me know. You had a suggestion about holding an annual coordination meeting with all the RBCs. And there's a recommendation doing it prior to the start of the legislative session. There's also a recommendation about RBC having representation at the legislature's water day. Try to capture that one. Does that look okay?
I still don't think that's necessary to tell all of them in the state coordinate. I mean, I can understand those of us in the upstate having meetings that get all of them together. It's just like just having a meeting for the sake of having a meeting. I mean, we don't have a lot in common with those below the fall line down there, except the water that we don't use eventually ends up down there and in the ocean.
Yeah, some of the lower RBCs, because of that point, may want to have more engagement with the upper RBCs, because they're getting the water that you're using. But can't necessarily speak for them.
And I think another benefit to that is if there are legislative recommendations, there may be merit in having those discussed with all the RBCs. So that if it is a recommendation that has merit, there is more strength in all of the RBCs are supporting that. As opposed to one RBC pushing one way and other RBCs either not knowing what's going on or pushing another way. So I think there is merit in if the RBC process is to continue. We're not looking at just this 2-year cycle, we get a plan and we all go to bed. And my understanding is this is to continue. That there is merit in having at least some sort of means for the RBCs to discuss what they're thinking and what actions the RBCs in general should be pushing for legislative or policy recommendations.
Let me ask this question. In the future, is there going to be an overarching group that oversees and that the River Basin Council reports to?
I think that gets to one of the questions that we're going to talk about in our next agenda item in regard to replacing the PPAC. I think some of the members were interested in what the status of that was and if there has been discussions about some new type of PPAC. We can talk about that now if you want, or you can wait until it comes up.
Go for it.
Yeah. Joe or Scott, has there been any further discussions about any new type of PPAC?
I think there has been some discussion. The current PPAC members have been contacted for and their interest moving forward. And what that PPAC may look like has not been fully ironed out, but there has been some correspondence to that regard. It's about what I know.
Okay. Okay. Do you all think there should be another organization like that to replace the PPAC and serve as a kind of an overarching planning body, help direct the effort of the RBCs? You think that's needed?
I don't have a strong opinion about whether that is needed or not. My point is, of course, if y'all think it's important for all of the RBCs to get together, then it would kind of follow that it would be important to have an overarching group to report to that would represent all of the water use in the state rather than a loose conglomeration of the different RBCs getting together once a year with no structure.
I guess I don't see value in, like, we continue as groups, and then there's another group where there's no overlap on people who physically sit on the basic councils and then sit on the PPAC. And then you have a surface water study committee at the state level, like, it's just like, it's a lot to have to coordinate across. So if there was a representative from each basin that got together, like, it maybe was facilitated, so to your point, it's structured to a point and not just like, oh, we just get together, and then they maybe report to this surface water study committee, which I know we need to talk about. Also, like it needs to be really clear, like the layers of communication and avoid redundancy in meetings, in my opinion. I don't know how others feel about that, but.
Yeah, I agree. I think they somehow need to be linked together. Otherwise we're existing as different orbits. I think we're all trying to get to the same goal, which is a improvements in our state's water resource planning, so, however that looks, they need to be linked and related somehow.
Well, under the, you've only got 3 planning process recommendations. I think it's the appropriate time to talk about, do you want to make a recommendation, since it's being discussed DES right now about replacing the PPAC with some other type of organizing group. Do you want to make a recommendation that you think that's a useful organization?
So Myra and I talked about that about 3 weeks ago, and she thought that the formation of PPAC is what really got it's what got all of this going.
Yeah.
She appreciated the knowledge and the group of people that were together that were a part of that group, and she strongly wants to either rename it or have that same group move forward, especially with what you're talking about, Catherine, about the committee, full of elected officials, looking at water resources. I mean, it's not that I don't fully trust elected officials, but they're not experts on water, and we need to have a group of people that can guide, advise, and give them the truth about water. Whether it's a mixture of what we have here, rather than just talking to constituents. So I'm all for the recommendation that we either be renamed and move forward, because that was the governing body of all the SBCs, RBCs. And they did a great job. And it was a group of professionals and experts that can help DHEC and
Yes.
yeah, sorry. No, don't we get a couple months still calling? Yeah, the email still works, so I can still call it that. Along with our elected officials that are gonna be on that. So we pushed to get some upstate representation on that committee. We think Rex Rice's, I think, was appointed to, or will be appointed to it, and then somebody out of Rockville. So yeah, I believe that we need to continue with that role. Not a 500 something group, but a smaller group.
So what do you think would work then for if the PPAC still exists and all basins still exist? Is there a mandatory one person from each basin that sits on the PPAC so that you have that bridge, or how does the communication work? What do you think?
I think you let DES figure out what experts they need, what they're lacking, or what they think can help them with their decisions. Because personally, I'm worried about and as a Greenville Water, we're worried about legislators getting heavily involved in surface water.
The representation of the PPAC was diverse, kind of mimicked the RBC where you had water utilities and ag, environmental interests, the whole gamut. I would think that would be important as well. So if you have one RBC member represented, that's good, but you need to make sure you represent all those water users too.
Right.
Yeah, well, we've been fortunate that we do have Jeff, who's been on PPAC, and also on our River Basin Council, and I would hope that any group that's formed would have some kind of direct connection with each one of the River Basin counties.
Yeah, that'd be ideal.
All the basins do have a PPAC member on them, don't they? Minus Catawba.
I think so.
North Savannah. I think lower.
DeMoss.
DeMoss, yeah, so they do. Yeah. Okay, well. Jeff supports that recommendation. Everybody else support?
I actually think DES is going to do it whether we recommend it or not.
Yeah.
So you might as well recommend it.
Well, I think there needs to be a water planning group. Again,
Whatever you want to call it.
yeah, whatever you want to call it, whatever the makeup is, there needs to be kind of a stakeholder group, much like the PPAC when they were formed. Do I think it needs to be the PPAC? No, I don't. Because people have changed, there's different groups, there are different players that weren't on the original one that, we didn't have a strong role for, don't know the proper term, but Clemson was represented, but not other academic groups that are doing water planning stuff. So I think there needs to be an opportunity for other folks to be represented. But I think there absolutely needs to be a group.
Okay, and the other thing to think about too is the intent is when these river basin plans are done to update the state water plan, and that group could help with DES as they update the state water plan.
And I do like the idea of at least a recommendation that they take one person from each river basin committee. Whether it just would be a nice bridge from one to the other. If there's somebody missing off of it, that should be addressed.
Yeah, it does.
But it shouldn't only be made up of River Basin council members.
No. There should be
Yes.
some people who are into the science a whole lot more than I would ever be,
So Tate has volunteered to be.
I'll try to help you a little bit.
So if you look at the current legislation that's for this, that's gonna guide this, who these 7 members would be coming from. 1 member from the governor, 2 members from the Senate.
Oh, right now you're talking about the Surface Water Committee.
Right.
Right, and if folks aren't familiar with what that is, I'll put up this is the whatever, enacting legislation from the budget or something, but it describes the Surface Water Committee that Rick is talking about. I'm sorry to cut you off, you can go
That's
ahead.
okay.
So this is different.
It's different. Well,
Everybody's not familiar with it, and I'm not completely familiar with it either, but it's a study committee with that membership that was given the charge of. Where is their charge?
Yes.
Number C.
Yeah.
Letter C.
Study the current state of surface water in South Carolina. Shall include information regarding surface water, the number of permit holders, registered surface water users, use of withdrawals, recommendations to the General Assembly. Regarding probably laws.
just saying, there's a lot of swirling things here, a lot of overlap, there's a lot of things coming from a lot of different directions, it seems like. It's hard keeping up with it. What's going where, who's gonna be overseeing this and that. These layers upon layers, committee upon committee. It makes me wonder the things that what we're doing right here, how is it gonna have any merit going forward? What are we doing? All the stuff that we're doing, is it gonna have any relevance at the end of the day?
So my understanding in conversations through email with Kate Maroney, who's helping to put this group together, is that they're still identifying the membership. They're still trying to figure out their charter, but I offered us, this RBC and others to help support their efforts if they need it. So I think it's just evolving, and hopefully they reach out to the RBCs for guidance, information, result from their studies. About all I know about it.
Sounds like Jeff has a little intel on committee members.
I didn't hear, sorry.
Sounds like you have some intel on who would be on this committee.
Yeah.
Other than Clymer, can you share that?
I'd have to go through my emails on that, so.
Okay,
Okay,
you send it to me.
I'll have to make sure it doesn't say protected.
Okay, thanks.
right, so we will expand and add a water planning group type of recommendation. The other one was you had recommended the formation of upstate inter-river basin council of the Upper Savannah, Broad, and Saluda. Everybody still comfortable with that? Yeah, okay. All right, those are the planning process recommendations. Then we got into technical and program recommendations, and some of these don't need additional discussion. Others, there's going to be some overlap with ones we talk about later today. Melanie brought up early in the process that there's additional data that could be collected at the county level to help validate flows in the SWAM model. We didn't do that as part of this process, but it could be done as part of a future model update. So we've included that on there, recognizing that there is county level data that could be collected. And that data may also be useful for addressing water quality issues if that is something that's done by the RBC in future planning phases. There was a couple items where we identified the need for more data. One of them was fish and macroinvertebrate data in the Blue Ridge province. And not only getting more data there, but trying to use the existing data to evaluate those flow ecology relationships. Michael, does the wording of those generally capture the spirit of what you were looking for?
Yes.
Okay. There was also some discussion about encouraging SCDS to explore the expansion of the ambient water quality monitoring network. There's some recognition that it's less robust than it used to be. And the RBC recommends increasing the number of fixed monitoring sites, especially in the upper part of the basin. Everyone's still comfortable with that recommendation to DES? Okay.
John.
Yeah.
Are we going to define what we mean by upper, middle, and lower parts of the basin? Is that, I haven't seen that any place in the report.
Yeah, that was used very generally here. If we want to be more specific, we can, but we don't usually talk about the upper, middle, and lower part in other chapters or sections of the plan.
Okay. We'll think about that.
Okay. Okay, we had a recommendation too about encouraging the use of this plan once it's finished to support local comprehensive plans and economic development. Primarily by illustrating where water resources are abundant and where there may not be as much water to support different types of future use. We had a recommendation that developers work with the water utilities to ensure the availability of adequate water and infrastructure. It certainly goes on now, but I think there was discussion that maybe it could be done even more.
I don't know where that goes on anywhere.
No, okay, I'll take back what I said.
I was about to say, we sit here.
I don't know where the developer has ever coordinated with a water utility. They coordinate where land is cheapest.
Okay.
Well, they gotta be able to get sewer too, but yeah, that's how they don't care about water.
You don't have to get sewer.
I would suggest just removing local comprehensive plans, because I think that that's a separate topic and can be addressed by a separate recommendation, and that this should be focused on economic development. Are you cool with that?
Yeah.
That idea? Yes, no.
Like the Brazilian
Yeah.
restaurants.
You might have to do that. You might start doing that.
I just take silence as they vote for yes.
Yeah.
Somebody will speak up.
Just so everyone's clear, if you don't speak up, I'm moving forward, you know, 24 yes votes. Yeah. Okay. Those were technical program recommendations. We do have more technical recommendations. There's a couple of them too that could be considered policy or technical. In fact, I think I previously categorized them as technical, and then when Grace and I went through these, she convinced me these are more policy related, and that has to do with some of the ones on stream bank erosion and this list here.
So Terrence, is your money available for the encouraging stream bank restoration?
Yes.
Yes, so we got a combination of programs that we call it the
resource conservation planning partnership where we can have an agreement with a partner to implement a cadre or a suite of practices. So riparian buffers, stream bank stabilization, reduction of sediment delivery from the field edge to streams. Yes, we have money available for that, sir.
So even if you're not an ag person, because we're not ag, you guys,
Yeah. You're not ag, so we're gonna have to go a different route in order for that to happen. Then it would be the Resource Conservation Planning Partnership. So if you have a chance to go to our website and look it up, you'll see the options. The challenge is it's competitive and it's done at the national level with that program.
Melanie, the projects that we toured, have you used NRCS funding programs?
Yes, we put our 319 funding together with NRCS Equip. We partner with Greenville County NRCS, and we've done, I think 5 together with them. And, we've also gotten a recent funds.
Okay, this first recommendation is just the listed recommendation. There's not discussion behind it. Melanie, I was kind of looking for you to add some discussion behind it, because I think this one's largely your area of expertise. If you would like to add some discussion behind it.
This is for which, I'm sorry.
The one at the top of the page, encourage stream bank restoration, riparian buffers, and other practices that reduce sediment loads in streams and reservoirs. And that one, I think we've got a slide on it later on to flesh that out a little more and break it up into pieces. I mean, there's a big difference between riparian buffers and stream bank restoration and subtleties that we may want to, some folks may want to make recommendations on, others may not want to make recommendations on. So
I feel like that's true for most of the ones left on this page that we've got
I think you're right.
more depth.
Yeah.
Coming on some
Right.
of your slides.
And one thing I'm struggling with is we're moving into these recommendations. So this is a state water plan. Are we trying to make recommendations for planning elements at the state level through state laws? Or are we trying to make recommendations that would also trickle down to local jurisdictions? Because
Well,
we can really get into the weeds with
Yeah.
recommendations for locals.
The way I've always looked at it is that your recommendation should focus on the Saluda Basin. But if you want to make recommendations that might apply at a state level, you're welcome to.
So our recommendations in this state plan can be.
Well, this is not the state plan. This is your river basin plan. State plan hasn't been written yet, but DES, when they write the state plan, will likely look at all the recommendations, and ones that might apply statewide, they might consider and put them forward as part of the state plan. So you can do both. I mean, but we want to be specific. If you're making a recommendation for the Saluda Basin, we want to be specific about that. If you're going beyond the borders of the basin and making a recommendation for something statewide, I think we want to be clear that the Saluda RBC thinks this is important statewide.
So really the recommendations can apply to not just local permitting authorities, but to other stakeholder groups that might be working on different initiatives. Like.
Like, say that again, I couldn't hear that.
Well, so. The local, I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around how broad to make the recommendations. Are they for, like, can they be geared to citizens, for example, or is this more geared to, local implementing authorities for, say, MS4 permit systems?
Yeah. But I think that's up to each RBC. If you think there's an important reason to make a recommendation towards one group or another, then you can do that. because there's, and we'll talk about this in a minute, there's a lot of ideas for recommendations, and there is some concern of y'all just making broad recommendations covering a lot of different topics. It
Right.
starts to get away from
Yeah.
what our focus is, which is water quantity planning, water quantity issues. So we need to be cognizant of that and not just start making recommendations for some, small group because you want them to change their practices, or one specific municipality because you think their ordinance isn't strong enough. We need to be thinking strategically so that we don't dilute the importance of this plan.
Can we go up to the previous page? I'm just. So these policy.
Yeah, these are technical program, now we're getting the policy, and Catherine's right, we're gonna be talking about a lot of these as we go on. So actually, for now, let's just move on and let me capture the discussion from almost all these topics are future slides, and then we'll use that to build on these. The main point I want to show you is just we're starting to capture these as part of chapter 9. I think we're good with planning process recommendations and most of the technical recommendations we've talked about so far. Today, we're focusing on policy, legislative, and regulatory, and we will be for the next meeting or two. There is one I wanted to ask because I don't remember the discussion here, and Grace and I, when we were reviewing it, she reviewed the tape. She couldn't find information about encouraging or strengthening design standards to capture larger storm events. For some reason, I'd written that down, but we weren't really able to find a lot of discussion of that when we reviewed the tape. Does anybody remember? Was that a recommendation we discussed?
I think that had to do with having to capture the 2 or 5 year storms versus because we're experiencing higher frequency of larger storm events, reconsidering like what is that baseline standard. And if we had a recommendation, I think that's kind of where the conversation was going, but we didn't really land on, should it be the 10, should it be the 100, whatever.
Okay.
So you talking about not, used to, we would design a dam for 100-year rain event. Now you want to go to 500-year or 1,000-year or something like that rain event standard.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily just for that, it could just be, we're just talking about a development and how much you capture on site, and the ordinances vary by municipality. We're basically, the consultant, we have a lot of job security because we allow a lot of downstream issues to result from not making development capture or handle higher events on site.
Well, I said dam, but that's what you're talking about is rather 100-year event plan for a 200 or 300-year.
Well, but I think it's mostly, it's not the 100-year now, like that's unheard of, I think here, it's usually. But it's usually like 2 or 5.
I think most in the state, I think minimum is 25 years storm event.
Okay,
I think, and so there are some municipalities that have taken their stormwater programs beyond that to require 100-year storms, but not many. So that, you're right, that is the consideration, moving, advancing from a 25-year storm to designing for a 100-year storm, or something like that.
I'm all for it. We've seen in the past what big rain can do, and on a routine basis where you talk about these developments, the design standards for them, they routinely overflow. And a lot of times it's not from a design problem, but it's from a maintenance problem. Because once they get in there in the homeowners association, they don't maintain this thing. They forget about those catch basins and stuff. And so those of us who are neighbors, and go down there and see the water pouring over on us, I think we ought to do something about it. There you go.
Well, and this comes back into making the recommendation with design standards to include more low impact development and green infrastructure type designs. This will get more water underground, less water runoff. And that's just rocket science, to get the water underground rather than runoff issue. So I've been a big proponent of low impact development and green infrastructure for a long time as a solution to the rain events that we keep having that blowing out.
Okay, was there someone online? Kirk, yeah, Kirk, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, and John, just at the beginning of this conversation, I wanted to just offer some generalized guidance that I like to share with groups about recommendations so that they can have maximum impact. These aren't rules, they're just some thoughts and guidelines and a framework that I like to use in this context, and especially because there's so much to unpack here when you're looking at an entire basin and water management. So if it's okay, I'll just read through the 5 guidelines that I like to use. In formulating these kinds of things, and we can maybe ask ourselves these questions as we're going. The first one is, are there things that we can do that reduce the uncertainty or the unknowns from this 2 years worth of planning? You know, we're doing a lot of analysis. We have a lot of questions. Are there things that we can do in the coming years that can reduce the uncertainty that's going to be associated with this report? I think that's one thing that can be helpful. Another one is, are there things that we can recommend that can be measured and compared using the kinds of metrics that we've used here? You know, water availability, the flow statistics, the shortage potential. When it comes time to update this plan in the next 5 years or so, whenever the frequency is, are there things that can be measured in the context of the analysis that's been done? Third one is, are we focusing on right now the principal process of this plan, which is water availability and allocation, in addition to maybe making recommendations that future planning rounds look at other factors, facets of water management, flooding and water quality and climate and things like that, things that we haven't been able to really dig into here. Can we make recommendations that future rounds include that kind of thing? The other thing too kind of augments what you had said about making sure things don't get too dilute. And that's making sure that each recommendation really can add identifiable value to this volume. This report is going to have a lot of heft to it. It'll have a lot of recommendations. Can the recommendations, each and every one of them, add something substantial to the report? And then just to reinforce your message again, that it's the quality of the recommendations more so than the quantity that is going to catch people's attention and perhaps give the plan some real legs when it moves forward. So those are just guidelines I like to use with groups like this. They're not rules; they can be broken. You can agree or disagree with those, but I find it useful in discussing any recommendation to kind of put it through those lists of questions. So I hope that helps. I'll just offer that now, and if you can, people can ignore that if they want, or they can use those. But I find that it is often very helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Kirk. That's good. And by the way, if I didn't mention already, Kirk's going to be facilitating in September. I'm going to be out of the country that week. So Kirk's listening today, so he can pick up where we leave off the September meeting.
And if you don't like my ideas, you can run me out of town then.
Right. Fair enough. Okay, so I think that's a good segue, so we can pause, do our break, and reconvene at a little after 11:15, and we'll jump right into additional plan recommendations, fine tuning which recommendations we want and which ones we want to tweak or which ones we want to move on from. So let's break until 11:18.
Talk off. That's good.
So we're going to use the rest of our time today to work on recommendations. Before that, I did want to pose some questions that I think came up in the kind of work group and workshops that Catherine was organizing. And one we've already addressed. What's the latest on PPAC reformation? Any news? We've already talked about that. Catherine, you had a question, or someone had a question, maybe it was everybody in your work group, about what are the next steps, or can we review how next steps will go for implementation? The idea of recommendations can serve as a basis for the next 2 years for the RBC. Let me just explain the implementation plan. The implementation plan is primarily focused on the next 5 years. And for every recommendation and action in the implementation plan, we want to put a timeline, whether it's first year, second year, third through fifth year, whatever, but it focuses on the next 5 years. There's also a section in the implementation plan about long-term strategies and recommendations and actions. So we break it up that way. The idea is that many of the recommendations, especially the ones that you prioritize, will serve as the basis for your work over the next couple of years. So there's another question I think you had about prioritization of recommendations, and you all are welcome to prioritize your recommendations. What I would encourage you to do, and what the other RBCs have done, is prioritizing the implementation actions, which are focused on most of the recommendations, but you identify those as high priority, medium, or low, or we're doing this first, second, and third, however granular you want to get. That said, if you want to prioritize your recommendations, you're welcome to. We just have not done that in the other RBCs. I don't think the PD hasn't prioritized recommendations. They prioritize strategies, water management strategies, but they're really not at the point where they're doing recommendations yet. Okay.
Well, not completely. That's the question we're waiting on the ground.
Yeah. Okay.
We're close.
Does that answer your question?
Well, and let's just remember that I'm trying to capture lots of people's opinions and things, and then obviously these aren't necessarily just my questions. But I think part of it too was kind of what Melanie was getting into, what level of the weeds did recommendations get into, and maybe we all just need to remind ourselves differentiating between recommendation and implementation strategy, what the difference is there. But also to Kirk's comment earlier, and we were just having a sidebar conversation of, yes, we are quantity focused for this plan, but we also can make recommendations that are futuristic and thinking for what the next steps need to be.
Right.
So I think just like some clarification around that is the essence of that question.
Yeah, okay. Question was, it would be useful to review who is committed, folks that drew 3 or 4 out of the envelope, if they are still committed, and determine the process for recruiting, application process, new RBC members to replace those that are done after 2 years. Will that be in January, or will all onboarding be in March? How will that work across the state in general? I guess to start answering that, let me just say that in like the Edisto and the Broad, I think the majority of the RBC members that had expiring terms said, yeah, I'll keep doing it for another 3 years. If your term expires, whether it's 2, 3, or 4, you automatically go on a 3-year cycle. So I'd say, I don't know, 70% maybe said, yeah, I'll keep on. Does that sound accurate?
Maybe a little higher.
Maybe a little higher, yeah. I can't think of it on the Broad or the Edisto. There hasn't been any new applicants and new folks identified to serve on the RBCs. That's primarily because there's only been one additional RBC meeting in the Broad post completion of their plan. 2, they didn't have a lot of attrition. They didn't lose a lot of members. I don't know if DES is going to re-advertise, say only half the RBC members wanted to stay on, and there was a lot of turnover after 2 years, and then 3 years and 4 years, if DES would re-advertise to fill those positions. Assumedly, if the RBC is still meeting, they would, to try to maintain representation for all interest categories, but it's a little unknown, I guess. So that's my thinking, but I don't know if Scott or Joe want to add anything to that about recruiting or the application process.
Is this a recommendation?
No, this is just a question. It may lead to a recommendation. I think maybe that's where the question was coming from, but
No, opposed to members asking other folks to join. I mean, there'll still be a vetting process to add them. I'm not opposed to that. And I think, we have a responsibility to make sure that councils are fully staffed, and so we'll advertise for those as needed in slots. Sure to have to do,
okay.
or have done with that.
This is a list of current RBC members and their term length. The ones that have a 2-year term length, your 2 years wraps up this spring, like February or March, right? So Phil, I'm gonna pick on you. You're the first one on there. I think Duke probably wants to maintain representation on the RBC. So whether it be you or someone else, would you want to continue?
I am willing, and able to continue, and I expect I would be the representative. So, no, that'd be a yes. in my
Okay.
case.
Yeah. Is Jason online, Davis? No.
Jason's not here today, but I will bring it up. I'll see him.
Okay. Robert, would you be inclined to continue after your 2 years up? Yes. Patrick?
I will, I'm still in the state.
Okay.
We'll talk later.
Okay. David Lawrence has not been in attendance for the last 6 or 7 meetings, so we've reached out to him to see if he wants to stay on the RBC. And if he does, he needs to be attending. So we may talk about him the next meeting. Tate, you're a 2-year person. Do you want to keep on? Yeah. Devin, you're online. Do you intend to keep on, or would you turn it over to somebody else from rural water to take your place? You can hear me? We'll come back to Devin. Maybe you can put it in the chat, Devin, if you can pick that up. Melanie, you're 2 years. Do you want to stay on yet? Yeah. And then is Rhett still online, or Julie Davis?
Yeah, I'm on. I plan to continue if that's okay.
Okay. All right. So what I heard is that most of the 2-year folks would continue on. So again, I'm not sure the origin of that question, but does that kind of answer your question, Catherine, or whoever it was?
It's more for like planning ahead, just, you know, we're gonna lose people, just be able to start thinking about
Right.
who's gonna get this one.
Okay. Whoops, and then the other question was, and I think Joe already talked about this, what funding is currently dedicated for ongoing work for our basin? I think that's just going to be year to year as your budget is prepared, right? What you're going to ask for, and then what the legislature allocates.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's kind of how that works.
Yeah. So it's funded for the next year, but it's all subject to year by year cycles, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. We had some suggestion, or Catherine passed along some suggestions. We kind of already talked about these too. About recommendations. We just need to make sure our recommendations are clear. We don't want ambiguous recommendations. So help me if you think they're ambiguous or could be misunderstood or don't represent the true nature of the recommendation. Measurable to a benchmark or successful completion implementation. That's going to be more important when we develop our strategies and our actions that are part of the implementation plan. We want them to be measurable. The recommendations don't necessarily have to be, but as we transition those into actions and strategies, we want to make sure they're measurable. They have benchmarks. We should also note that key or priority recommendations so that it's clear we as an RBC deem most important. Again, if y'all want to prioritize your recommendations or put an asterisk next to the ones that you think are most important, that's up to you. You're welcome to do that. If you'd rather just prioritize them as part of the implementation plan, that's also fine. You just have to let me know how you want to do it. Okay, as we talk through these recommendations, we're going to kind of put them into buckets. So we've got 6 or so recommendations that already have draft language proposed. And we're going to start with those, and we're going to see if there's consensus behind them. As we look at those, if there's clear consensus and maybe they only need minor revisions, we're going to put those in the green bucket, right? And then we're going to move on. If we get to a recommendation where after 10, 15 minutes of debate and discussion, it's clear there's not full RBC support, but you don't want to throw it out yet, we're going to put it in the yellow bucket. All right. If we talk about a recommendation for 5 or 10 minutes, there's not a lot of support. We don't even at least have half of the RBC supporting it. There's no clear path to consensus. There's no wording or changes to the recommendation are going to get more than at least half, then we're going to drop it. The point of this is I don't want to spend all day focusing on one recommendation. I want to keep moving through because we've got a lot of ideas out there that have already been identified, and you all may have other ideas that you want to propose that aren't even here. And I encourage you to do that as well. So we're going by the green, yellow, red bucket system today.
The red one we light on fire.
What was that?
So the red one we light on fire at the end of the meeting.
If you want to.
Yeah.
John, I would also say that it's possible that some of the, maybe not the draft recommendations, but when we get into some of those more like ideas that he's fleshing out, some of those might be voted on to go become an implementation rather than a recommendation. So be thinking about that too, like different areas too.
Okay, so
John, can I ask a question here?
yeah,
Uh, this process that Catherine's been leading over there, these volunteer groups getting together and developing, some of these suggestions and stuff. I'm sorry, but I'm just kind of a little uncomfortable with that. I mean, I know that we are a group that's created by the state. And we're very formal in what we're doing here, but to create these unauthorized smaller groups, go out and make recommendations, just doesn't seem to me to be exactly in the same spirit of what we're trying to do here. Not that I'm accusing anybody of anything nefarious, whether they got an agenda that they're trying to push, but I'm just a little uncomfortable with that volunteer procedure. Let's get together and make recommendations.
so the genesis of that was something I asked for, was a way to get recommendations ahead of time so that we can kind of organize them and present them in a logical manner at these meetings. It wasn't to, let's get everybody that might support our riparian buffer recommendation together and get that recommendation so we can kind of push it through the RBC. I want to avoid that. It was just a way to organize the recommendations and then have a full RBC discussion about them. I understand your concern. I guess the way I look at it is they were voluntary work groups and anybody could have attended them. And it was a means to help organize and make these meetings more efficient. So that was the way I saw that.
I know that's the way you were looking at it. To me, it would have been better to appoint, subcommittees to look at different ideas or whatever, rather than doing a voluntary group, because I mean, there's a lot of folks here, this is their main focus, whether it's their business or they work for a group, and they got that kind of time and energy to put into it. And then there's some other folks like my farmer crowd here, and I'm sure there's some others in here that are self-employed, that really, they're not really available to get those kind of meetings.
That's the challenge of every part of this planning process, unfortunately, and
but I'm not committed to coming to these meetings. I'm committed to coming to 3 or 4 more and volunteer.
yeah. So we want to make sure we hear your voice at this meeting, and even speaking on behalf of Jason too, if he's behind you. We want the ag community to be represented.
Yeah, and David Coggins is not here today either, so they're out working on the farm.
I will say that has been a concern in all the RPCs. Just generally, the ag folks have a harder time attending these meetings, which occur during the day, especially in critical growing seasons. And we need to figure out a way to make sure their voice is always heard.
That's really nice.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just kidding.
I wish we had Farm Bureau representation on all the RBC, because I think you serve as a good voice for the whole community, and you have better abilities to attend when some of the actual farmers can't. But I recognize your concern. And maybe in the future, we'll think about how we do that.
And I guess what I'm saying, like I said, I'm not accusing anybody here, and I don't think, there was any underlying agenda here, but I'm just saying it could be.
Right.
Can I put a slightly different look at it? Because I know I talk with folks in my industry about what the work we're doing. Almost as I'm representing other water systems. And if they say, oh, y'all need to think about this, I feel very comfortable bringing that recommendation to this group. It can be shot down, that's fine. But I think bringing a topic to this group to discuss is fine. And even if it's members in here to bounce stuff off of each other, I don't, like you say, I don't think anybody's doing anything nefarious. So, but getting, and even folks outside of our industry, if they brought something that quite frankly is not the way I think, as a recommendation, I'd be, would welcome the opportunity to bring that up to folks. I couldn't defend it. If I say, here's the recommendation, everybody's like, Casey, that's junk. Yeah, that's junk. Hey, we go on. But I wouldn't feel bad about bringing it to the table if somebody felt like, this is a recommendation, throw it out there and see what happens.
We're all here to represent a constituent.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying, don't like all this. Go ahead.
Okay, let's start with this first recommendation. I'm gonna read it and I have some questions about it and suggestion too, but I want to get obviously feedback from everyone as to what bucket we want to put this. Continue positive progress at the state level for watershed planning and general environmental protection. The RBC calls for a state-led assessment. The current funding to DES. Memorandum should be prepared explaining the funding needed to support our growing population, critical activities, including the funds needed to implement the basin recommendations provided in the plans. Who wants to speak on behalf of that proposed recommendation? I don't know who generated it, but I think whoever suggested it, I'd like to hear why you think it's important.
I'll just say where it came from. So I was told by a member that DHEC was decreased, like had a significant, no, DHEC at the time, had a significant decrease in funding at some point. I don't remember the year, somebody might be more knowledgeable in this space, and that could, if they're not fully funded to the capacity that they need to be, that might cause challenge for us implementing our work moving forward, especially since we aren't really guaranteed unlimited funding to continue this process. So that was I think the theme around that recommendation.
I think I was the one that brought that forward, and we heard our South Carolina Rivers Forever group, which is a group of river organizations statewide, heard a presentation from Myra Reese recently. And that was one of the first things out of the gate, was that they, are funded at in general, at a level that is, and I don't want to speak for the actors or the, but, and we've heard this for years, that more funding is needed, that they're funded at a level, of a population that we were, some years ago, around 2 million, and we're, I think, a population of over twice that now. So it's just a general statement of, more funding is needed from our legislators to support our Department of Environmental Services.
I think it's a well put statement. I mean, because again, why do anything? You're not gonna have the funding to support it. From DHEC, what we've known in the past is that, enforcement or implementation and those type of things have lagged behind because of the lack of funding and support for staff. And, so without staff and funding to go to hire these staff, then you can't, enforce or implement what's on the recommendation table here, or what's going forward out of the statewide water plan. So, and population is growing, and more population means more issues, and more issues mean more we have to have an agency that's fully funded to implement and keep our water safe claims.
Okay. So I have some questions about this, and as I read this, the RBC calls for a state-led assessment. Well, where in the state, who in the state is intended to be the organization that leads the assessment? Is it intended to be DES? Is it intended to be the legislature? Is it intended to be the basin councils? Watershed. We are a basin planning council, not a watershed council. So are we talking about basin planning? Are we talking water management planning? Funding needed to support our growing population and critical activities. Critical activities decided by whom? By RBC, by whoever's leading this assessment. I understand the purpose of this, but I think this is so nebulous that it's not, it's too nebulous to be able to implement. the way it's written.
But the overall recommendation is, and I think we've all talked about this from the get-go, is there has to be some sort of funding source for the work to continue. I don't know if we've really identified what that funding source should be or how it should be in play if we're gonna recommend that we're just at the whims of the legislature every year for what they put into DS's bucket, and then everybody in DS scrambles for that chunk that they can get, or if it needs to be something more defined, but the overall recommendation is funding source, correct?
That was what I wrote forward.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily assessment or anything like that.
And critical activities, could be, in my mind, is, implementation, monitoring, those type of things, more gauges, more et cetera. These are the critical activities that need to take place so that we know what we got, what we're doing.
Robert, I think you expressed my concerns when I read this, is that I would encourage the RBC to develop if you want to develop a recommendation around funding, to make it focused on this water planning, not watershed planning, but water planning, not mention general environmental protection, not try to look at DES funding as a whole, but focus on what your purview is. So I think if you want to keep this type of regulation, you need to tailor it to focus just on water planning. That's just my thought. That's kind of what I've heard, your suggestion, others. What do you all think? Do you think this this recommendation has merit in terms of water supply planning? Do you want more transparency in funding needs, commitment to future funding support, or does it not need to be a recommendation?
Let me ask the question again, what do we want? What, are we just wanting the funds to continue the planning, or we want funds for implementation?
Yeah, I think we need to be specific, and you need to decide, do you want to at least make sure there's enough for planning, or do you want to make sure there's enough for implementation, because that's where stuff actually happens.
I think you need both.
Yeah.
Planning and implementation. You have to constantly be planning, and you have to constantly be implementing the plan. Like those things don't go away.
Yeah.
Planning didn't go away, implementation didn't go away. You're gonna need both going forward, particularly as we grow, and we're growing so rapidly, and development is going so rapid that, I think it's gotta get ahead of us.
Okay.
But I should be able to accomplish in one simple sentence.
Well, is everybody generally behind a recommendation to encourage DES to continue funding for river basin planning and implementations of the actions and strategies identified? Pretty broad, but it's just basically saying we think this process is important enough that there should be continued funding.
To make it meaningful, I would suggest, I agree with that, but I would suggest that there be communication between the RBCs and DES to develop what funds do the basin councils want to see, what funds is DES going to ask for? Because they may be two different things. We may have, between all the basin councils, there may be 20 different recommendations, and DES says, oh, we're going to pick one. I'm going to pick that one. We'll ask for funding for that recommendation. And so if we're going to make this useful for the basin councils and for water planning, I think there needs to be in this recommendation some sort of recommendation for communication between the basin councils and DES regarding funding for continued RBC program development and implementation.
Joe, all the money doesn't necessarily just go in a bucket. I mean, the legislature can earmark through their budgeting process.
Right. And I
money for y'all.
may suggest that you state, funding request to the legislature to continue this process
Yep.
as well.
Okay.
And, you know, certainly it's incumbent upon DES to cover their program areas and their funding asks on an annual basis, but I don't think it can hurt that such an organization also goes straight to those that decide the funding to make that same request.
One reason I mentioned that seed grant opportunity to hear from Georgia EPD is for this exact reason is, you know, you might want to make a recommendation that South Carolina identify similar type of seed grant program to advance some of the lower cost recommendations. I'm not talking about, you know, building a new reservoir or something. I'm talking about stuff that's mostly related to filling data gaps, getting additional information, the lower cost items. I think that's generally what well, that's not necessarily true. I think they'd use the seed grant. They'd use the seed grant to advance studies on bigger picture infrastructure that is needed. So kind of greases the wheels for, you know, doing new well fields or whatever. But if you want to make a recommendation about the legislature developing some type of river basin planning implementation fund that's separate from the planning process, this would be the place. But you might not be in a position to do that. Maybe you want to hear about the seed grant stuff and then come back to this.
I think we could listen to that, but again, I think we captured the implementation part up in one. And then down below, you know, I think you're right, maybe that the implementation process is a separate funding request, et cetera, but I think both planning and implementation need to be part of it.
Okay. Okay. Sounds like there's somewhat consensus behind a type of recommendation focused on continuing the planning and asking the legislature to continue funding planning and considering ways to fund implementation. Is that accurate statement? Okay.
Green bucket?
So I'm going to green bucket this and we're going to work on the wording and then you're going to get to react to the wording. So.
I'm down 50 to go.
But it does make it quicker when you have a base to start from.
Okay, this one's about safe yield, and we're going to talk more about this probably next month when we get more into legislative and regulatory recommendations, but this one was already specifically written, so I figured let's just look at it as written, and we may decide to table it and tackle it later, but let's look at it. Safe yield is a concept originally developed for reservoirs and groundwater, was later applied to streams and rivers. Defines the amount of water available for withdrawal from a particular surface water source in excess of the minimum stream flow or minimum water level for that surface source. And it's the basis for South Carolina Withdrawal Reporting Act. This terminology has led to lawsuits, is not grounded in science, nor does it account for the flashiness of the river system. Keeping safe yield as a basis of for our surface water allocations could result in additional lawsuits, watering, and over allocation. This concept should be eliminated from state law, and DS should study peer state basins for a better determination of allocating surface water resources. So the crux of the recommendation, I guess, is this last sentence. Yeah. Yeah, Kurt, do you want to offer something?
Just a quick question to clarify this, John. We talked about safe yield in two different contexts in this process. One was a safe yield evaluation that we did with the SWAM model for reservoirs specifically, which is mentioned at the beginning. It seems to me that this comment or this suggestion is referring to the state process for allocating water from rivers. And I think it's explicit that it says that, but I just wanted to make sure people were clear on which of the two versions of safe yield this was referring to.
Yeah, and you're correct. I think this is specifically referring to the definition in the current laws and regulations about safe yield of a basin, not of a particular reservoir. Yeah. Okay, so comments, thoughts?
I cannot disagree with what it says, but until I know exactly what they're using as a second part of this, I can neither agree nor disagree with it. I need to know more than just this concept should be eliminated. State should study peer states and basins. I need to know, I need an in-depth of what they're going to use to see where it goes.
Agreed, this goes against my general philosophy. If I'm gonna criticize what you're doing and say you ought to stop it, then I need to give you the alternative.
Yeah.
And this doesn't give the alternative.
This is people that just don't like the word safe yield. And I can't agree that it's not a bad term because it's not what it is, but I need to know what it's going to be, what the change is going to be and how it's going to affect me. Not being stingy, but I'm just being, I mean,
Well, and
that's why we're all here. Yeah.
I would argue that there's probably folks around this table that have more issues with the surface water withdrawal act and permitting reporting
I agree.
than just safe yield.
I agree with you on that.
So if we say, we think the law needs to be reviewed, addressed, that's one thing. Just to point out safe yield, I don't know if that's.
You have a valid point.
Yeah, this is getting into policy, and I agree with, it's hard to talk about safe yield in isolation without talking about other elements of the water withdrawal law. The problem with safe yield in our water withdrawal law and implementing regulations is that safe yield as defined in the act is different and conflicting with safe yield as promulgated in the regulations. And EPA has agreed, and there's currently a lawsuit against DES on this subject. EPA has issued a decision that this, along with other elements of our water withdrawal act, create new, that these are flow standards that effectively create new water quality standards that are inconsistent with the Clean Water Act. And that they don't support designated uses. So I think all of that is worth some debate and discussion, and also in context of other elements of the water control law. The safe yield that is defined for our rivers is not based on any science whatsoever, and it leads to potential over allocation. It's unrealistically high, and is a recipe for over allocation, and it effectively allows some users to completely dewater our rivers. So I personally would like to see it go away. What could be left in its place? Perhaps just the minimum flow requirements, minimum in-stream flow requirements. Perhaps basin specific evaluation of other states understand to it. But to have an overly simplistic equation based on some political decision from 2011 that makes no accounting sense whatsoever in terms of what's actually available for allocating or withdrawing. I think it's dangerous for the long-term security of our resources. Whether you're a municipal user, whether you're an industrial user, whether you're an agricultural user, we should know what's in the bank.
Exactly. And I've got a letter here from EPA, Alan Wilson to Myra Reese about this same subject, about safe yield and surface water withdrawal. I got the whole document right here. And it clearly lays out what Mel talking about. Over allocation from the get-go, not downstream, not hypothetical, it's over allocation from the get-go. So this term that we use, space per watershed or a reservoir, not or a pound, not a river.
So do we want the recommendation to be we look at the current laws overall? Or I just tackling the safe yield issue to me doesn't address the problem.
Well,
I think if we tackle this one, the safe yield may or may not get addressed. If we don't tackle that one, it won't get addressed, except in the courts, and that will be ongoing, and the law will be changed somewhere along the line.
Chevron's gonna hurt that.
Can we table this and put it with the other regulatory water withdrawal law? What's the discussion?
We can, yeah.
I think we should, this is complicated, and I think we should try to knock off our easy ones first.
I'm all for that, because Kirk's gonna have to deal with this next month. And I've reminded him of that, so.
Yeah, many times. John, I put something into the chat that just might be something for consideration, and we can talk about that more next month when I'm down there.
You want to read it, Kurt?
Well, yeah, it's, and again, this is, this is a regulatory and legislative issue, and we're not going to solve it in 1 or 2 meetings, but, maybe the RBC takes a stance that, or makes a recommendation that the state has invested a lot of money in the SWAM modeling across the state, and all of you have spent a lot of time using that. It's scientifically based, and would that be a good point of departure for evaluating current policy against our understanding of water availability? That might be something concrete and constructive that the RBC could recommend, and that would need to be, need to think that through very carefully, but it may be a tangible and functional starting point.
Okay, throw this in the yellow bucket, and we'll pick it up in a broader discussion of regulation law. Everybody comfortable with that? Yeah, okay.
Also, just will say one more thing. I think we can't be afraid of acknowledging something we see that needs improvement without, like, we don't have the time to come up with a solution for everything, even though I appreciate that we don't want to say, like, maybe eliminate is a strong word, because we don't have the solution, but I think we're still capable of saying that we don't agree with this as it stands today and further studies.
I'm just saying.
If you're looking at my business though, that I don't need a reduction in what is the water I can pull. That's gonna be difficult for me to assign. It doesn't mean I can't, other people can't outvote me,
Sure.
but it's gonna be difficult for me to sign on, not knowing what I'm signing on for.
Well,
But you don't have to sign on for it to go away. You can just agree or disagree with signing on for it to be looked at or assessed or whatever word you want, a verb you want to put in there.
Okay, what are you gonna say, Tom?
no, my only point was that everybody in here would like to see some changes made in the Surface Water Withdrawal Act, and that includes agriculture. Would like to have some, would like to see a few changes, but I'm just saying, we need to be very careful before we open up the Surface Water Withdrawal Act, because it's a passionate thing. We may not get sound science coming out the other end. And we need to be careful before we recommend opening something up and reviewing it, not have some idea of what we want to get at.
So I agree with Thompson on that. We need to frame our recommendation to frame what kind of answer we want, a good, sound science, well thought out, discussion amongst peers type of conclusion.
Set an expectation.
Yeah.
Sorry to be hijacked.
No, that's fine. Okay. Well, it's right at noon. Let's break for lunch, get lunch, maybe in about 20 minutes, we'll start up the discussion again and continue on while you're finishing lunch. That sound good? I always give people not enough time for lunch when I say 20 minutes, or is that enough?
I think you just want people to get their lunch in 20 minutes.
Yes.
We can go at the same time.
Okay, so online folks, yeah, online folks will start up again right around. All right, okay, we are back on the clock. Okay, there was a third drafted recommendation for consideration that said the RBC requests that the legislative approved Surface Water Study Committee. Talked about that a little bit earlier. Collaborate with the 8 basin councils prior to proposing policy and rule changes to the South Carolina Water Withdrawal Permitting Use and Reporting Act or any other water quality or quantity policy. Thoughts? Feedback? Discussion? Who likes it? Who doesn't like it?
I think we need to figure out the makeup of the committee before we say anything pro or con about it.
We don't make the
The individual.
I mean, depending on who the individuals are, would you not suggest they collaborate with the 8 RBC?
Yes. Yes.
I'm with him.
Don't elaborate.
I would like to hear the first meeting of the committee to see what their goals are, I mean, all we have is that write-up that you did that was very broad with a very short deadline of what, March?
Well, so that's the other thing. I mean, by the time this plan is final, that committee is gonna be
They'll be done.
done. So is there really value in making a recommendation?
No, that's not wasn't true.
That wasn't true.
That
Yeah,
our first deadline was kind of nebulous, so,
Oh, I don't
It's
know.
probably gonna go into 26.
right, so it's not good,
Okay.
right?
Which means it'll have to be up in the budget again, because it's a budget proviso, so.
That'll be interesting.
So. Let me ask this question, to your point, Casey, is there any merit in pushing to have this committee have their first meeting as a public meeting?
Well, they're all public meetings.
So they are, but at least online public meeting? So if anybody's interested, join. Is that something that the council can?
Well, again, I think they will all have already theoretically done a bulk of what they were doing before we even get to this.
So at this point in time, if we are interested in what this committee is doing as the Basin Council, not building a plan, maybe put in a parking lot for our next meeting, to discuss how as a Basin Council, we want to apply and impact to this committee. Put that in the parking lot for discussion at our next meeting.
Yeah, if you want to, if you expect to get more information about the makeup and duration of this committee, bring that on the next meeting.
I don't think there's a guarantee we're gonna have it about the next week. I mean, we have all tried to reach out and find more information about this, so. We're like work is being done.
Okay, I mean, I can.
Do you have your finger on the pulse of the committee?
No. We have, I mean, DES has not been, you know, if you read the proviso, they're to consult DES, that has occurred.
So Jeff's our best, most knowledgeable.
That's the inside.
Well, that's sad.
That's where we're going.
But rather than making it part of the plan, can we not just have a direct communication with them to make a recommendation to them? Without it being in the plan, you have a letter or whatever, on this river basin.
I mean, that's a good suggestion. The RBC could just draft a letter and send it to Kate Maroney, who's helping organize this, saying, hey, we'd like to have a voice. So, sounds like a good idea to me. That way, that's where you don't have to wait for the recommendation to be made.
This committee's gonna be ephemeral, right? So it's really. It's appropriate to put this in.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of suggesting, especially if it's done in March, but yeah. All right, so let's,
And the letter can still be formal,
right,
right?
right.
We got our first red bucket.
Yeah, it's red bucket this and who wants to draft the letter?
It looks like the vice chair volunteered to draft the letter.
Okay,
Good, Casey.
All right. So to bring the raw back or the
Execute.
just to offer our services, we would be
Yes.
available and be.
We would like to be consulted. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Let's move on. Number 4. RBC recommends that DES perform a benchmark analysis of our statewide water law, regulations, policies, and manuals, including but not limited to riparian buffer protection and water research operations, maps grading, construction activity review, and stormwater management and field manual. Documents should then be updated to incorporate recommendations from each of the RBCs and industry standards, providing examples to assist recommendations that are directed at municipalities. Whoever suggested this one, do you want to speak to it? Provide more information? Why you think it's a useful recommendation? That you,
I had some input to that, and
Robert?
now reading it, it's awfully long. The meat of it is the first part, that DES form a benchmark analysis of our state water law and regulations and policies. That's the meat of it. Where does South Carolina compare to other states, in particular states, peer states in our region?
You want to table this one for discussion during our law and regulatory discussion, or
That would give it.
That's probably a good idea. Yes.
not to kick the can, but
Let's kick it.
it's going to bring up a lot of issues that we're going to talk about later. Everybody okay with that?
And so all that rest of the stuff in there were things that different people who talked about this said, yeah, we should think about this, we should look at that, we should look at this. I'm part of that problem too.
There was a project that was done some years ago, I believe it was by residential. That's. Was not, yes. But it did that thing, and in order to the water policies, state water policies. Ours.
If it's 5 or 10 years old, it is probably outdated. Because there have been substantive changes in neighboring states and some of their laws and policies in the last 5 years.
Probably 5 years old.
But yeah, let's see.
Maybe the other element of this, because I didn't know about the stormwater management field manual, which I believe is last updated, someone correct me if I'm wrong, in 2005. So it's pretty dated in terms of, it's been updated or just, that might be true, but just like, there's a lot of stuff available, and it's like, what is up to date that then can be a resource for municipalities as they think about their ordinances and whatnot, and we that be consolidated into a single place. It's just, it's hard to navigate and find all these things in general. Like, if you are at a city or a town and you're trying to think of things to your own regulations, it's like, where do I even like start? Whereas Georgia is an example, but there's stormwater, they have 3 stormwater manuals, and significant number of municipalities just reference that manual because it's updated, it's easy, great, so then where are we and how do we make that easier? I think is another comment.
Could this be written differently though? I mean, because
Oh,
it
yeah.
keeps trying to push us towards quality instead of quantity, and we're supposed to, although I believe that water quality is important, that this pushes us towards this group looking at quality instead of quantity. This group is put together for the quantity.
Stormwater both though. Some BMPs help with both. You can't argue.
I do realize that when you mass cut a development and put all pavement, it helps with quantity.
Yeah.
I recommended we pave the watershed to improve quantity.
I'll be releasing a lot more water.
It was a joke. Anybody think I really felt that way? What long enough, it will be paid.
Hey.
All right, we'll come back to this discussion next month likely. Okay, this is a multi-part one, and it kind of touches on some of those recommendations that we were discussing at the last month, so it advances them somewhat. Urgency requests call to action each municipality within the basin to review their ordinances and design guidelines, consider inclusion of the following stormwater mitigation, groundwater recharge strategy. Riparian buffers. I'm not gonna read the whole thing. Green infrastructure, and tree ordinances.
Three, is that a recommendation or is that a policy?
I think it's a recommendation for a, well, I'm not gonna say for a policy, but it's recommending that each municipality review their ordinances and design guidelines and consider updating them. Enhancing them.
Well, A, B, and C.
What was that?
If we use A, B, and C as the reasons for it, we're looking more at policy than a recommendation on it. That's just me.
So you suggesting not including A, B, and C and say it's J?
But the first, what could be turned into a sentence there?
Yeah. Rick, I think this captures some of the issues that you're concerned with. Maybe this was your recommendation. You were probably specifically wanting to include reference to green infrastructure. I'm assuming, right, and possibly buffering and tree canopy ordinances, right?
Yeah. So, the way I think about this, or the way I put this stuff in here. When we talk about our goal is to address water quantity. And so riparian buffers, green infrastructure, and tree canopy all affect water quantity. And so, and whereas green infrastructure gets more water into the groundwater, means more help with the river, more water available for everybody. So there's been a runoff, just continuing going downstream, getting more surface water under the ground as they grow and develop. Riparian buffers again play into that as far as stabilizing the stream banks. Again, it will keep more water in the river and aids habitat, etc. Riparian buffers are the first and last line of defense. Quality as well as quantity. And of course, we all value trees and what they do. We're seeing a lot of mass grading going on. Mass grading, what we're saying is, less water gets underground, more water comes runoff, creates other problems for sedimentation and pollution type things. So all these three things work together. We think about getting more water available in the future. These are the three tools that we have that we can implement. These are my opinion, these are the three tools that we can improve water quantity, get more water in the ground, keep more water in our river.
Why are you just targeting municipalities? Most of the growth is down outside.
But municipality can be county. I think county ordinances, these type things we're addressing now in Green County, with the unified development ordinance being proposed in Green County. These things are being proposed in the new unified development ordinance in Green County.
I would probably.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, instead of municipality or county, jurisdictional body.
Local jurisdiction.
Yeah.
My mind works in boxes, things in boxes. It seems like when we kind of jump around here and do things. This seems. Should have a policies in the past. Policies, recommendations. state. There's other things that.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't trying to organize these as all state level. I just took the six that already had wording for the recommendations and grouped them together, even though they're different categories, but I think everybody agrees this is local, right? Yeah. What do others feel about this one? You like it? You have suggestions on revisions, or you have issues with it altogether?
I don't have issues. I don't have any. I stay with the same thing, is that, again, this is just. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for all three of these things. It has to be a storm. But when our goal is not to look at repairing buffers, green infrastructure, it's more about quantity. And I know that you're talking about quantity, but some of these things are so limited, the amount of quantity of water that you're gonna get back in the system. I don't think it. Our time should be spent on this because, again, it's for me, this is quality. And our mission is quality water, staying in the future, so don't get mad at me, but this is not what's in my scope for this group.
I'm just gonna be devil's advocate for a second. We spent a meeting, touring those stream restoration sites, and the goal of those was to reduce the power and erosion because Saluda Lake is filling up, and investing millions to dredge it, and 10 years later dredging it is a quantity related issue. So lots of storage from scour and sedimentation and runoff. It's impacting availability of water.
We've got several 319 projects also that I'm still saying that that's not.
It's not direct.
It's not direct input for this group. So I mean, I'll listen to it all day long and I'll agree with everything you said, except it's not what. I don't want to start going off onto a spur here, and then another quality issue comes up, and another quality issue. I say we still. So that's just my opinion.
So how is it not directly related to water quality?
Because it's directly related to water quality. And that's what I'm saying, it's directly related to water quality. Not saying it's not related to a lot of quantity, because it's not. But it's related to more quality than quantity.
And you're saying it's more related to quantity than quality, it's more appropriate maybe in like a water system, not in this type of plan.
Right. And I'm all for all these things. I like the riparian buffers,
I agree with all.
I agree with all these things, but I don't want to get wrapped around the axle on, okay, well, this quality issue will also help quantity. This quality issue will help quantity. I mean, then we're starting going through subdivisions and through high-rise developments and things like that. And we're going to get wrapped around the axle about every quality issue that's turned into quantity. So, I mean, that's.
But that quality issue does become a quantity issue for me. By lake spilling.
I agree with you, but I've got a solution.
I know you do.
If I agree with water.
That's not mine.
Robert.
I might take a sort of middle of the road approach, because I don't disagree that these affect quality. But I also agree with Rick that they affect quantity. And I have not been able to do this, but at one time I was able to do a hydrograph analysis of one of the Reedy River gauges. And it shows that this is a gauge that has 40 years of data, or used to have 40 years of data. And it shows a substantial change in the hydrograph of the river as Greenville has developed. And the changes are, the peaks are higher, the base flow is lower. And so that is a quantity issue as you develop out an area and you don't pay attention to what you're doing with stormwater. Because you have a rainfall, if you're not paying attention in highly impervious surfaces, as you know, the peak's going to get high, but then all of a sudden your base flow is going to be low because you're not recharging the aquifers that support base flow of a river system. So I do agree that these are quality, but I also think there are substantial benefits to quantity.
So when the top area do we just consider include before that ordinances and design guidelines relevant to quantity issues? We can include the three down below, but instead of having them bulleted, just because we're saying consider the inclusion of the following strategies, riparian buffer, green infrastructure, and tree ordinances. Those are just examples of things people can look at. Calls them out, doesn't go into details on them, but it calls out the importance of the ordinances and sign guidelines are quantity issues.
We'll come to that. Josie, you had something.
Tagging on to that, I do think it could be worth keeping as separate bullet points, but then rather than putting anything that can be misconstrued as solely a quantity, or I'm sorry, quality issue, focus on things like reducing sediment loading and ensuring that, you know, basins are available for water and not sediment. So maybe we reduce something, you know, as near and dear to my heart as it is reduce. Where is it? Keep reduced erosion. Keep reduce runoff. Add in something about reducing sediment loading. And then maybe remove stuff about riverside habitat. You know, that's important, but that does pertain more to quality than quantity. So can we reframe and workshop the words for this so that it is specifically, you know, it's really clear that it's a quantity VMP rather than quality.
You could change it to river habitat though, because we did do a whole ecological assessment and talked about species vitality long term is in our scope.
And does pertain to needing to have water in the river,
Well, going back to you then, could you live with the recommendation that we tailored it to focus on quantity?
So we're putting in the yellow bucket.
I'm asking if you could live with it.
I think with, don't get me wrong, all these things I implemented in other places. Again, I am just worried about, I mean, when does it go to what's loading in the river? I mean, that's the next thing is, oh, now we're gonna have to do something because the loading in the river is too high or the quality of the river. And those are things that I have specifically been on this committee for, is make sure that it stays totally about quantity, not quality, because we control the quality of the water for the Greenville water. And we're trying to do the same things for the river basins downstream. But I don't want somebody to get into telling me how to manage my watersheds. And then this eventually could get into my watersheds.
And I'm waiting to see if this stays in, because if it stays in, we're gonna use it in some form of fashion. I want to add to it. I want to include an incentive in there to keep land in agricultural use and permanent cover and soil conservation measures and all that. As one of these stormwater management, stormwater mitigation factors. I mean, that's a huge factor out there. Rather than, just concentrating on what's happening on new development around the river. I mean, I've long believed that these stormwater fees should be turned right around and used to help farmers keep their land in some kind of permanent cover, or you got minimal tillage and all that, so that you do improve the quantity and the waters.
Not everybody has a stormwater fee though, so that money isn't universally available.
Everybody has a stormwater.
You can add.
That's just not living my little.
Everybody's got
Some of the things he was suggesting, most of the RBC members would probably be on board with those, with recommendation. They are kind of some quantity, some quality. Does that make you uncomfortable if we venture off into that?
Makes me.
Yeah.
If we make some very general language, that says something like recommend policies, practices.
Speak up a little more, because it's hard to hear.
We recommend policies and practices to help prevent stormwater runoff, both infiltration and examples for including. We have read this so many times. Back in the early was in the swimming questions, funded by Quincy and Rasmussen Foundation. And over 30 studies done, had stormwater recommendations, we have 74 recommendations, some of which are still very valid today. But it is getting into those weeds that we can point to those studies. Just making some general, statements about land use policies. It's even raises the question, well, what about land use plan? What about zoning? When some of these fast growing areas are sprawl. I don't know. I mean, where do you put pulling the yarn out of the sweat?
I think that's what Jeff's concerned about. He doesn't want to go down that word.
This doesn't capture all of these other things that I see that recommended from the past that some of them get 2 points of view. But we want to go into that level of in detail and trying to manage what we recommend in this jurisdiction. Pull out and draw our recommendations.
Well, you think it's a fair statement that when local jurisdictions are doing zoning decisions and updating ordinances and making ordinances, they're probably not thinking much about water quantity, probably thinking more about quality related issues.
They are.
Yeah. So, and I'm not trying to convince Jeff, but I think he's the only one on the other side of this right now. Maybe that's the important point here is that they're not thinking about quality. They're not thinking about from a quantity standpoint, and we want to just touch on the quantity standpoint. Maybe we make do some suggestions like Josie and Ellen just have, where we just say there are some quantity related aspects to these. We want local jurisdictions to consider that as they update their design guidelines and develop their ordinances. You go live with that?
Well, I think, part of what he's getting.
Yeah, the
You know the answers.
Actually, no.
Again, without a lot of words spending on this, I would not.
You shall go there.
I don't even know.
I mean, everything that we're doing here affects both and water. And to some extent, I guess that's what we all is measuring this by. Is this 75% quality, 25% quality, 90% quality, 10%? Maybe that's what we ought to be evaluating some of these things on what percentage is even good as far as what's going to impact. I see this as mostly quality issue with some impact on the quantity, and all of our quantity policies that we have has some impact on the quality. So, yeah.
Okay, I tend to agree with you, but you might get a different answer from different folks. So Kate probably has a different opinion because of the sedimentation in Saluda Lake, the amount of money to restore the lake.
Anything we can do to keep, fluidity out of, Cedar River, I'm all for it.
You're off the word, yeah.
So I'll sign up for wherever you need.
Yeah, we need to recommend Casey.
So there's 2 things here, green infrastructure and the tree ordinance particularly are about water quantity. Because the more water you get underground, it's about groundwater recharge. We're talking about water quantity. What are your tools in your tool chest that you have to keep more water in your basement, keep more water underground, and where all that water right now is running off. It's going down, it's going forever. You know, the more repurposed surface we get, more housing we get, more roofs, more cetera, more runoff. That's less water getting underground. Less water going underground means you have a less aquifer. Less aquifer means you have less water in your river. It's that simple. It's that simple. So riparian buffers are water quality. Green infrastructure, tree ordinances. We know the value of trees. Know the value of green infrastructure. This is happening all over the world, not just here. I was just in Italy, green infrastructure was mandated everywhere.
Okay. What were you gonna say, Casey?
Well, I was gonna say, how about we yellow bucket this? Go back and heavily edit this. I think conceptually, if it's driven by quantity. Folks are on board with the concept of having local jurisdictions. Frame their ordinances and design guidelines to positively impact that. And let's see what that language looks like and continue the rest of it.
Are you okay to take that, recognizing that we never convince you?
I didn't say you could never commit, I said that maybe wordsmithing, I might. Again, you open the door. And all of a sudden, he's wanting to regulate ground cover downstream. You open the door, somebody's gonna say, let's go ahead and do turbidity measurements in the river. You open the door and you've got a whole lot of things that are gonna happen. So
tell me what door are you talking?
I'm talking about the door to make this a quality group rather than a quantity. This is for the quantity of water that's going to be withdrawn from the river. The river streams lakes. I will tell you right now that you cannot feed a municipality quality water in a quantity amount by putting in green infrastructure. Everything you said is true. It does affect the groundwater, but it doesn't affect the amount of water that a utility is going to pull out of the surface water withdrawals. And that's what and the water, as a water utility, I want to make sure that we don't go down that road. So, and I'll tell you, I know your problem exactly, and some of these things might help.
So you're not, what you just said, totally against water quality.
I'm totally against water quality in this group. I love water quality.
As he said, he's all for the three things.
Yeah, but they don't have to be the priority of this group. And that's the only thing I'm arguing. You haven't said anything that I disagree with. But I'm sticking with how this group is going. It was said in the very beginning, this is about quality. We are not quantity. We are not going to include quality things in this group. And that I want to stick with that.
So I think the distinction that needs to be made is this first 2-year planning phase. Per the framework, we are focusing on quantity, but the framework does open the door if RBCs want to begin to evaluate quality in future phases.
If we get through the quantity part.
Okay,
I'm fine.
all right, so you are fine.
But I didn't introducing it now derails the. We gotta come up with different words for quality. The quantity.
Volume
And volume. That'll work. Oh, okay.
So,
Okay.
do you think we just have a single recommendation then that is like,
Look at
this
it later.
group needs to think about quality in the next 2 years, period? Because I would argue that this is our one publication document, so if we aren't setting ourselves up for the work we want to do over the next 2 years, we're doing ourselves a disservice. by not
So the document is not a living document that can be changed and added.
And we aren't editing this every year for an earlier recommendation that we made.
I've got to stick with what when I was appointed to the group was quantity based, not quality, and we were told to be quality out there. This code is still considered.
If this is simplified to the point that it just says the RBC requests a call to action, blah, blah, blah. For implementation of groundwater recharge strategies to ensure consistent base flow in the Saluda River and its tributaries. Is that something you could get on board with? Because that is quantity only.
Again, I would consider.
Same practice, I think it's coming on board.
I'm honestly with you because I'm thinking about the purpose of this group at this stage, and it is quantity based. And, you know, even I can sympathize with your end of it because you're representing a group. You're not just representing yourself with this decision, and you have to think, what will the group that I'm representing be okay with me signing off on. And I think that we could simplify this to the point that, you know, it includes recommendations for the things listed here solely for the purpose of groundwater recharge. And, you know, when you're carrying this back to, if this happens even, but when you're carrying this back to people who are reading what you're signing off on, if it specifically says to ensure consistent base flow, that's what we are wanting, or that's what I'm wanting this for. And I think that's what really matters for quantity.
I would
So-
consider it. I mean, it's just, I'd like to see it.
But is a long-term mandate?
Yeah, I mean, is there a deadline where we switch quality or what?
Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is the first 2-year planning phase focuses on quantity. After that, the framework opens the door for quality related issues to be addressed by the RBC if they so choose. But the focus is to continue to reach quantity. The next iteration of the plan.
That's every 5 years theoretically. For state water plan.
So,
But the framework
I was gonna say, that's what was written.
I can read it, that's how this is.
Melanie, you had.
Oh, I just think that there's kind of building on this. Thing that pretty much is that there was support and develop regulations for local jurisdictions that help to minimize impervious surface, decrease stormwater runoff to the negative impacts of base flow. We've already got that documented through studies that were done 15 years ago. Or on the today. Things can include, that's examples. These things could also have these other water quality benefits, but the emphasis on quantity.
Okay.
To keep our flow. Land is effective, what's good. I think we're trying to get.
Yes.
We're dancing around it. We need to.
Okay. Let- Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll put it in
John
another bucket.
Dance with
We'll-
him.
We'll
See how good he is.
wordsmith it and focus it and figure out what Jeff's favorite dessert is, so we can bring it next month. And
Key lime pie.
Key lime pie.
I could make,
I love some key lime cookies. They didn't have them this time.
All right. Moving on, this is. We'll let him unveil it.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah. Thank you though, Kirk. You already jumped ahead, so you helped us out.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll come back to it next month.
Yep. The last of our already kind of written recommendations for consideration was. RBC recommends that as part of the comprehensive planning process, that each municipality across the state consult both the resilience plan developed by the Office of Resilience, and their associated basin plans for inclusion within the resilience element, as required by South Carolina Local Government Comprehensive Planning Enabling Act as amended in 20, ensure that zoning, land use, stormwater ordinances, et cetera, are adjusted to support the resilience element.
Well, that takes care of everything you want right there. And you don't have to put it in our thing that says these are things you want to do.
That's it, right there.
It does capture a lot of what between the free and supply. You might have. I think having, keeping it in our yellow bucket and we'll step it up a little bit and see if it still flies, if it doesn't, we'll live with it.
Okay. Well, you want us to do some wordsmithing to it.
I'm actually okay with this.
You're okay?
Yeah, I'm okay with it. Because
We
said now. Okay, I'm yes. Now argue for it and then.
Oh my God.
So he can change his opinion, is what he's saying.
Yeah, take that video.
All right, well,
Does everybody know what this means?
Yes.
Does everybody know what the Comprehensive Planning Enabling Act is? Does anybody not know what that is? Want clarity? Want clarity? Okay, so. All municipalities are required to do a comprehensive plan. Their comprehensive plan is regulatory in nature, but it guides future growth and goals and wherever a city, county, town wants to go. And you have to do one, and you have to update it. The quality of those vary by municipality. They also vary by the amount of money that you have to put into those plans. The city of Greenville has a lot more than small like West Pelzer as an example, okay? But in 2020, South Carolina ruled that you have to have a resilient element. So we have 9 elements that are required in that plan by state statute. Not all states have that. North Carolina is actually extremely broad. We have really specific, like you gotta include all these things. And so I think what I like about this, and I will admit I wrote this speed, because I'm scared in the room. I have to do that, is this is like, hey, there's 2 documents. There's this amazing Hope Warren and team at SCORE put so much effort into that, that guiding document that really helps municipalities with their comp plan, especially the resilience component. And then I would hope that every municipality looks at our plan and that it doesn't just sit on a shelf and they pull it down and look at it and go, oh, how can we incorporate some of the recommendations here in our comprehensive plan? So it helps build that bridge, helps make it not feel like dust. It is required anyway by state statute, so we might as well have them get on our thing. So that's the nucleus of that.
So when you say here the Office of Resilience and their associated river basin, that's not implying our
Let's say
plan.
the local jurisdictions associated.
But what river basins plan are you talking?
Well, if I'm in,
You're not talking about.
I'm in Myrtle
RTC.
Beach, I would look at PDs. I'm in.
Yeah, you are talking about.
This is a statewide recommendation.
The RBC.
Yes.
What's more, starting around would be something process.
There's another type of plan that could come later too, and that's the recommendation. Some jurisdictions are developing that have same recommendations. And we think that is that worth mentioning those plans as well? And we're getting into planning.
I don't know much about those plans, whatever y'all think.
I sit on the Greenville County Hazard Mitigation Stakeholder Meeting, and with the Pickens one too. A lot of this is a lot of process.
Well, we don't want them to contradict, that's for sure.
Right, and they all can inform one another. This is kind of. So it could be worth just mentioning the other plans if they feel.
So, what's happening in Greenville County now? So their comp plan is fueling ordinances that are coming about for the comprehensive plan. The one thing has to lead to another. And so the comp plan leads to, more specific ordinances that are coming about, like on the land development regulations. Mr. got planned, earlier this year, we were able to get rock bearing buffer part in. And now with the unified development ordinance that's coming again, in support of the comp plan, planning staff is looking towards some of the infrastructure and other type of things that, are gonna be coming for our developers to reduce runoff, get more groundwater recharge, and do things we talked about in the previous, question. So I support this. I think, fairly well written. I agree with that.
What's the nexus between our plan and the resilience? Because there are a lot of other plans out there that people have done that would be equally good for them to consult. Why are we calling out the resilience?
I called it out because it's new, so one, it's fresh, and 2, it addresses the resilience element, which is from the 2020 amendment to the South Carolina local government. Act. Which is the only other document I'm aware of that directly addresses this element.
But they're kind of required to do that anyway. I'm just saying,
They're not required to look at scores. Document. That's.
so as an RBC, why are we enforcing that one instead of the USDA or wildlife? Make sure you got corridors for critters running across the county and stuff like that. I'm not opposed to it, I'm just.
It's a valid question. I just pulled it out because they presented to our group. And I don't know if they'll address the resilient plan in there. But if we're uncomfortable. We'll see nobody else's document and then then we should at least support our decision.
Oh, I agree with that. I think they should associate the associated river basin.
Well, quick show of hands, who likes this as written, who wants to keep it? Does anybody disagree with it, has a problem with it being included? Addressing Melanie's comment about referencing hazard mitigation plans that may or may not exist, I think that's worth adding to.
I have a recommendation and how about coordinating. Okay.
That's a mitigation plan, we talked about drought, the drought is in there.
Yeah, we did, right? I thought we talked about coordinating those plans, then maybe we just didn't turn it into a recommendation.
I don't remember that, if we did, I don't remember that discussion.
Well, it's something.
Okay.
And that's very important. So,
Okay, we'll update it, maybe we'll add reference to hazard mitigation plan, so it's basically, we've got it in the green and sort of the yellow bucket a little bit, because we're gonna work smooth it slightly. We want to keep things moving. Okay, now we're getting into just different questions and ideas for discussion, so. Again, these came from the notes that Catherine provided, and I guess their genesis was discussion amongst your work groups. And it's kind of a way, and we've organized them in a way by category to elicit potential recommendations if you think there's a recommendation that needs to be made from the RBC. So again, these are just meant to generate discussion. They're not meant as a recommendation. So there's some related to water utilities. Question was, what recent policy changes, performance changes has each water utility already implemented within the basin that could be considered as a basin-wide recommendation? So Jeff or Kate or Patrick or so that's about it. You guys done anything recently that you want to consider as a basin-wide recommendation?
Policy standpoint.
A policy standpoint. And
Not from conservation district. Well, sure. I'm represent local government here.
Yeah.
No, working to. So I think it's 5 basically.
Okay. Well, let me give an example though. If you were representing one utility. What you've been doing with Star Iva is trying to build resilience by identifying an alternative source of water, groundwater.
Yeah. And we're
Right, and I'm assuming you're still pursuing that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
we're glad groundwater infiltration is anywhere we can drill a well.
right. So I mean, so I highlight that because I think that checks the box for this category here. Is it something you're implementing to build resilience in your utility? Have a backup supply.
Yeah, well, from our standpoint, 1 is done, and 2 is done. And right now, I'm sure Anderson region water system. About 300,000 plus or minus people. We have east of Lake Walker, we all got that. And it's a real problem, real quick. Yep. I can press for comments. I like to think about it.
Okay, but other RBC members, do you think there's need to make a recommendation that utilities look for ways to enhance their resilience? And I know you guys have done this. I mean, spend a lot of money on it. It's maybe a no-brainer, but just throwing it out as an example to address the question.
We're resilient as long as they are.
That's
Our
interesting.
emergency connection is there.
Yeah.
So we're pursuing multiple connections as well, which is not
Yeah.
as practical.
This may have been a recommendation to broad RBC regarding resilience, but you know, we did a little map of them trying to show where all the interconnections were, whether they're emergency or typical use interconnections. And I call pretty much all the utilities in the Broad Basin, and even when I spoke with them, there was a lot of uncertainty as to whether some of their interconnections were viable. They're like, well, I think it's only a 4-inch. I don't know if we can change that, or, you know, they just didn't know.
They have broken function.
Exactly, yeah. So I think there was a recommendation that considered viewing interconnections, increasing the number of interconnections to build resilience where feasible between neighboring utilities.
Our biggest is something we're addressing now, which is if we lost what I'll refer to at this point, because it's going into the big business, but it's a pump station we have uptown, which fills up all our tanks. We only have one building. If we were to have a fire, tornado hit it, something like that, we're out of business. You all can't even feed us. So we're in the process of fixing that, but that's looking at our resilience.
Yeah.
So, you know, but yeah, for everybody should look through it. Everybody should always, as a utility, look in.
Okay.
Resilient way.
So now we've got two examples where two utilities are looking to improve their resilience by additional infrastructure or additional source plus infrastructure. Do you want to make a recommendation around that? Or are utilities already doing that anyway? And what we say is making a difference?
I hope utilities.
That's what you probably.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say anything because we're embroiled with the utilities now.
Yeah, wait a minute. Yeah, we're looking at space.
So I
Watering mine.
I actually think that regionalization, a lot of people think regionalization is too small of a way. Like said, that how big is too big to be a regional water supplier? And my question is, how small is too small to be a water supplier? And that's my biggest concern is some utilities are too small to be viable for the lifetime of their systems. But they keep pointing at somebody, you know, utilities that are growing. So regionalization is a good thing, but it has to be on a bigger scale than two utilities. So what you just said about if Hartwell goes down, you've got two huge water stores, lakes that can pump water to Anderson and keep them in business. When you start thinking about the upstate as a whole, that's the reason why we talk about the basins getting together. When you start thinking about the upstates as a whole, there should be a pipe all the way from Broad River to Park. You know, Vegas does it. Vegas sends, Colorado River water goes all the way to California. If people around here think that it's just, you know, Dickens, Greenville, although Greenville does have partnerships with Lawrence and with and some utilities in Anderson, but we've never thought big enough in the upstate to be a major factor.
Not to debate this between me and you, but that's not the smaller system's fault in the long run, because 25 years ago, before my plant was built, they went to bring the water said we can't guarantee you the amount of water you're asking for. So we built a plant.
That was that.
Yes.
So Jeff, your comment about smaller systems, reflecting back on your comment when we were discussing free infrastructure, is it a quantity issue of smaller systems? Is it that they don't have the quantity available, or is it a management issue? If it's a management issue, then should the RBC be talking about that?
No, it's a combination.
Okay.
That will be management, technical abilities.
Financial capabilities.
Yeah, if you don't have money, you got nothing either, like not having enough water to have good water quality. But I'll tell y'all today, I'm serving a medium-sized utility. Yes, exactly right, the scale has to grow. I've had some real discussions concerning this about a basin, a long way from me. Because we all understand the resiliency issue is very
So there's two themes that we talked about here. There's resilience and then there's regionalization. Part of that might be interconnections. And ask the question again, do you want to craft a reputation around either of those things?
I don't know how to stop it. So I don't
How resilience affects what?
know how regionalization.
Yeah, that.
Raise your hand. Yeah, speak up.
I'm gonna utility,
As loud as you can, because this stands really loud.
something that Greenville, but I do want to send a shout out, and something that Greenville Water is doing a big way, and Eastern Combined Utilities is also doing, is the resiliency, that is, land conservation for source water. So identifying those lands in your, source water area that are highly valuable for source water protection, not only quality, but quantity, wetlands, floodplains, streams, all this stuff.
Okay.
That, I don't know if that fits here, policies necessarily, but it could be a recommendation for helping to develop that.
Okay. Well, let's just touch on resilience first. Utilization. You know, you want to make a recommendation focused on resilience for water utilities.
I think it's preaching to the choir for the utilities that will be reading this. But for others that may be, it is always good to have multiple sources. So if that is interconnections, if that is alternative sources, I think there is no harm in recommending folks evaluate alternative sources of water. So if we're going to make a recommendation, I think something generic along those lines. Again, utilities do it constantly. But for the basin as a whole, I think it would be beneficial, and quite frankly, it may be beneficial to utilities to be able to brush off this document and they're seeking funding sources to say, our basin is recommending we have an interconnection, but I don't have the money to run a 5 miles pipe to have that interconnection. Funding agency, will you help us? That would only go to benefit that grant.
Let's get more.
Isn't it downhill to start Iowa from us?
All that, what's your overflow elevation?
Look, I'm downhill from you. Talking about.
When you're going 90 miles, man.
Okay, so you suggesting something just simple like this?
Resilience slash resilience.
I'm fine with that. Other utilities? Other non-utilities?
I'm gonna take silence as a passive.
Yes.
So I
I'm
would,
different side agreement basis, only makes sense.
Robert,
so I'm fine with the recommendation. I just want to make sure that when we flesh this out, that Jeff's comment, we are focused on quantity, that there be a connection to this, in our chart, for this first go around, that we are focusing on quantity and how that affects quantity. So just a suggestion.
Well, I think one of the things that, I think the upstate, the only utility that was going to have a problem was, the Big Beach. Yeah, was in Gaffney. So I think resiliency does, in this case, would take care of the quantity issue for them.
When I was driving down I-85 yesterday, coming here, this was, I think, a main that somebody, the I-85 construction crew said, it's probably Gatsby, that was spewing out water at a great clip. So I don't know if they, had problems, but anyway. Somebody had a problem. Yeah. And actually,
I think you could put in there, you chose to build resiliency to ensure adequate quantity. I don't know, something like that. That's, I think.
Okay. Okay, what about regionalization, which Jeff brought up? Do you think the RBC, does the RBC want to encourage regionalization or evaluation of regionalization opportunities?
You got DES is funding on.
Yeah,
Pushing.
they encourage
And the rural infrastructure is already very, very close.
rural water.
Yeah. I don't have a problem with it.
Don't have a problem with it. Anybody have a problem with it?
Sure, we want to be running for water.
I mean, I don't disagree.
It's a long drive for you.
It is,
So are you suggesting, Casey, that there will be more in the Springville water system?
as long as Lawrence is first.
What
What about something like the upstate water system?
It works out.
You want to simply just say RBC encourages regionalization of water utilities or
Maybe the consideration of it.
consideration?
Consideration is better.
Yeah.
So go to your local hardware store and ask for a 50. Uncle Larry goes and gets, go to the big box store, ask for a 50. That ain't my job. I don't have a forklift license. So there's a combination, but there's strategic ways we can all partner on different parts of it.
Yes.
And the progressive utilities are willing to do that, partner with each other, including and up to split breakers.
Basin water utilities. Well. Now,
I
can't say upstate.
He brought up Spartanburg. That's why I
We go all the way down to.
So, you know, the one thing that comes out with Greenville Water is we've got a permit and we have an interbasin connection. And I'm not allowed there to say that.
Yeah.
But for the upstate to grow, there's gonna have to be interbasin transfer. So if all of a sudden you've got a group of people saying, no, we're not gonna do it. It's the whole upstate requires Anderson, Pickett, Spartanburg, Lawrence. There's another one to do too. Yeah, to grow. All of us together, and if you start, if all of a sudden it's like, what I hear is, you're taking our water. Well, it's not their water to begin with, it's huge water. And it's the course water. I mean, so it's not the water in the US. Yeah, so when people start going mine,
Yeah.
you're gonna ruin, you're not gonna have the economy that you could have.
My concern was upstate.
I don't have a concern with upstate.
Are we limited to upstate or mid country systems?
I am all for the upstate.
So,
I don't know where he's gonna get all this water, but
Look, I've reached out across the river.
sooner or later you run out, you get enough.
Over.
Yeah.
We know we got to do something.
What your purpose is on
Yeah.
You want me to just get rid of upstate, keep it base?
It's not limited.
I think
It's not.
we're gonna have ambiguity is okay right now because that's folks nervous.
Wow.
And I don't want people to read into what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay.
Does regionalization help keep the quantity in the river basin stable?
Well, yes, because you don't have people pulling water out of the river, you have to pull them out of big reservoirs. So you pull them out of Kiwi, Joe Cassie, Hartville, instead of out of, sorry. The Saluda River and the Saluda Lake, so it keeps quantities in those areas higher.
So regionalization would consolidate like the number of intakes you had in Ferguson.
It was, but And it's not only about growing, it's about your ratepayers. You've got use. Small utilities have higher cost of use than the economy scale. And when you've got rural areas paying $10 per 1,000 gallons, when we're selling at wholesale for $1.98, that's tragic. And that's the only way that small utilities can stay alive. And so if you partner through regionalization, right, the rates go down for everybody, and the quantity is there for everybody. And I think the quality is better over the years because smaller utilities tend to, like some cities that we talk to, their plants are shit, and they don't do this good water. So regionalization does do the important water plants.
So I don't disagree at all with what Jeff is saying, again, but when you, we cannot build the cost model into our document. We
Right.
can't say regionalization because it'll be cheaper for those people who are on small water systems. But I think what we could perhaps look into are those small water systems. And there are a number in the upstate that do rely on groundwater. Are those small water systems? And identify that this is an availability and management tool to allow, and just leave it at that, an availability and management tool. Regionalization is a tool to manage availability of water resources.
No, there's not. All right. From what I'm hearing, everybody's okay with the resilience, general recommendation, regionalization, general recommendations, so we'll move on. Okay. Okay, there was one, can we specifically ask that water utilities statewide develop triggers for mandating water conservation strategies, such as curtailing, power washing, residential irrigation based on drought level for a statewide approach? Yeah,
Absolutely not.
who's coming?
I mean, we saw this in the drought we just had. We went into a drought, we came out of a drought in 2 months' time. Since the last time we met, I don't know of a water utility that had a concern about water supply. Although the drought committee, mainly because of the huge impact it was having on some agriculture, deemed it best to go into the drought stages. So if you would have had these automatic triggers, and it would have made no sense. It would have eroded the public's trust into their water system to be a supplier. I don't see how that can work.
So let me elaborate a little bit. Beer's not always better. Like any of y'all drink beer, something can drink a 12-ounce beer pretty quick. A 40-ounce beer takes a lot longer to drink. So if we have those triggers mandated, we have a huge distribution system. I've got stage 2 distribution. My product, Great Lakes, I've got to meet. So I have to maintain water quality for our customers first and foremost, regardless of what Hope and her great group do. So there's not necessarily competing, but there are complicated interests that we all have to do. So that sounds great, but I would just have to violate that because I will maintain water quality. And if flushing is what I've got to do, that's what I'm going to do, no matter what the policy says. Amen. Yeah.
I'd rather do that than have to issue a notice to my customers that they have a health issue in their water.
And the health issue does not look good on paper. Yeah.
I think that's the JC, you can't even, in agriculture, we can't do what drought is. And I'm looking out there and I see it, light full, but like I told you all before, any 2-week period without an inch of rain is a drought in agriculture. In which.
So is there no medical
organization, state climatologist, USDA, Senator, whatever, there's all kinds of agencies out there telling you what the drought status is, and none of them need it.
Not if it hasn't rained on your property.
All right, we're moving on. I heard some definitive feelings on that. Are there annexation requirements that could be considered regarding water wastewater connections to assist with water quantity allocation? Eliminating donut holes could be good. Thoughts? Anybody that offered this one up or this idea or question up, want to speak to it? Cool.
So we already have that, ours, with the city of Greenville. So the city of Greenville, they sign annexation permission to be annexed in what city of Greenville. They only go and hold some small and sensitive travel strips.
Is there value in crafting some type of recommendation or that?
I don't understand it. No. Annexation or who, because like Jeff was saying with Greenville, downtown Greenville's a certain way. They've been selling water to everybody else for years. There's no annexation requirement for them to all become part of Greenville City.
Well,
So I don't understand.
they're talking about the sewer side in most places, like easily. We want some supplying Anderson County sewer.
Yes.
So it's, but, and we want anybody outside the city, if they want sewer, they have to come in with sewer.
Right, see, we're rural,
Yeah.
so we don't, there's no annexation involved. So we're looking for the whole basin.
Yeah. Unless we annex to Savannah. Yeah.
I don't see where it's really relevant to most utilities.
Okay. We're gonna strike that. All right. Data. There's a couple focusing on data questions. So is there value in a periodic review of basin flow characteristics over a more condensed recent past, like 30-ish years? Heather, do you know who proposed that? Is that your idea?
That's an idea, and it goes to, we do undergo periodic changes up and down, and it's not focusing necessarily on climate change, but there are changes over time in characteristics, and perhaps there's merit in reviewing what we have based our decisions on now, periodically reviewing the data to see is there merit in revising or changing our current sort of strategies that we're adopting.
Are you talking about outside of the SWAM modeling? Or just?
It could be within the SWAM model, yeah.
Some modeling efforts don't focus on the entire hydrologic period of record like we've been doing. So they focus on more 30 or 40 years. And when you have a drought of record that's within that 30 or 40 years, it's good. You don't worry as much about losing that early time. We did the whole period of record just to capture greater variability in hydrology. But I think the point you're making is that the 1930s, 1970s or 80s doesn't really reflect the characteristics of the system as it does now because of increased imperviousness, less recharge, and flashiness, and other factors which influence the hydrologic regime.
That is part of it.
Yeah. Okay.
And the watersheds are changing fast. With all the growth and development, they're changing fast. So the flow characteristics are going to be constantly changing. What point was it? A threshold we're looking at. We're looking at it over a really short period of time. Reviewing it back.
Yeah. So, we cautioned, hopefully we cautioned everyone. It's always in the back of my head, but I hope we verbalized it, is that, when we're looking at our model results for future 2070, we're only looking at increased demands. We're not looking at, because we don't have the ability with the SWAM model to look at the impact of changing the hydrologic regime because of increased imperviousness or other management of water that might impact flows in the river and reservoirs. And again, I think that's kind of also what you're possibly getting at too.
So since you mentioned that, I'll ask Joe, have there been discussions in DES about when a move away from SWAM to a more robust model, now that models have changed and can be done? Are there any discussions about that, or is we're hanging all our decisions on this plan?
You know, I don't think there's been much discussion that I'm aware of with that.
No formal discussions on it. I'll say that I think for some basins, I would hope to have a conversation, discussions on supplementing SWAM, more runoff, rainfall runoff type models. It's places across the state. I think it's something we should think about. There has been discussion, I believe, in the broad where we've talked about exactly what Scott said, is supplementing SWAM to look at, are there impacts and changes to the flow regime potentially from development that we need to take into account. I do still think, I'm just saying this because it's speaking to my self-interest, that there's still value in SWAM for doing the basic water quantity evaluation. Yeah, Kirk, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just quickly, regardless of modeling, just the data itself, going back to one of my earlier points, that one of the important purposes of these recommendations is to help reduce future uncertainty, and tracking any changes in flows for whatever reason is a good way to do that. As John said, the analysis we've done looks into the future, but with past hydrology. And so keeping track of future changes in hydrology is a great, in my mind, a recommendation for reducing uncertainty as that time unfolds. So in that context, that would be a good place for this recommendation.
And Robert, making the recommendation, what were you suggesting? I mean, you said periodic review of basin flow characteristics. Can you expand on it, I guess, or to what end?
Well, again, the end is seeing if there are changes in basin flow characteristics, particularly peak flows, 7Q10 flows, that you can track over time, tracking over time through periodic reviews to guide the basin recommendations, basin council recommendations. What I don't have fleshed out is how frequently should this be done? I think 30 years out, because that is a time frame that's been used for other. In the coastal area, I believe the state does 40 years for coastal erosion. Some people do 25-year cycle. So I don't have a time frame to get really fleshed out.
You also mentioned 7Q10. You said this 7Q10 really makes sense as we plan for the future. Just to be clear, we didn't really use any 7Q10 statistics in the SWAM modeling that we did. We used it as a point of comparison, not in this basin, or maybe we did, but in the Edisto, maybe in the broad, but just as a comparison to low flow statistics. But what was did you have a broader point about 7Q10 with regard to like wastewater simulation and using it for that, or what was the point about 7Q10?
So I think all this is related to allocation for basin. So right now, allocation is based on mean flow. And I think it would be very instructive to do a mean median on that, mean median and range analysis of flows. I am concerned, especially downstream from urban areas, that mean flow may be substantially affected by peaks. And so it is an overrepresentation of what is actually in the river, and that a median flow may be a more appropriate representation, or better yet, 7Q10 as building into the model as, and again, it gets to sort of this minimum in-stream flow versus versus the, current allocation model that we use. Maintaining minimum and stream flows.
You may have seen in the Edisto plan, Jason Thompson, Charleston Water System had a lot of statistics on mean versus median for the Edisto basin. In fact, I think he's done it for across the state to some extent, hasn't he, Scott? Yeah. I think he did. Yeah, I think he has done what you're suggesting. He looked at other gauges in the state, not just the Edisto basin, to demonstrate the point that you're trying to make, that median is more reflective and should be used potentially for water allocation rather than mean. So that ended up being a recommendation in the Edisto plan that most of the Edisto RPC was behind, not all, but most were behind.
So I would be willing to, if there's interest in Basin as we, in the committee, as we go council, we go further, that I pulled up 7Q10, but I am certainly not locked in 7Q10. I would support recommendations that that the council recommend median flow be used as a determinant rather than median flow.
Okay. We've got just a little bit more time and I want to go to a new discussion item. So any other thoughts or comments about what Robert has brought up here? Start with the first one. Is there value on peer review of basin flow characteristics? That could be something you do as part of your implementation plan, see if there is a significant change in the flashiness of streams, if that should be considered as part of the planning process.
I had a thought sort of related to that, and that is that the results of your modeling are driven largely by the drought of record during the period of your infill period. And so if going forward in the future, if we experience another drought of record, then the output of your model just sort of decreases. So we might want to recommend that we update the model in time you have a period of drought of record rather than any year period.
Okay. I would mention too, this is spurred from work that the Upper Savannah requested we do, and we did one and out. I can't remember if we did it here or not, but Upper Savannah wanted us to look at a synthetic drought. So something more severe than the drought of record. We do that here? Yeah. Right, okay. We've actually added to SWAM's capabilities to make that very easy. So there's 3 different options now where you can create synthetic droughts by splicing together, 2008, or I'll have to have Tim give you an overview of it, but he's completed that work, and it does make it easier to evaluate potential droughts of record. They might not have occurred yet, but we can do some synthetic simulations. Thought I just
we had this conversation before with what we're talking about. If you have a synthetic drought, then estimating some ballpark as to how often you would expect that drought to occur, and don't have anything like that, then you're like in contact.
Yeah, that's difficult to do for drought. It's easier to do for high precipitation. It's a little harder to do for low precipitation, but doing a synthetic drought tries to get at that issue. Yeah.
I wrote so early on that it's always been kind of I wonder if there's a way we don't really about the level of uncertainty around this way. Talk about that. It's just so there models have some inherently some level of uncertainty. That they are used to accept that level of uncertainty or some level of uncertainty. Let me answer that question. Can we ask it?
let me ask, Dr. Cox, for, if you look back to the Saluda, we have a Saluda model report. And in the back of that, we've got appendices where we compare monthly and daily simulated flows to actual flows for the whole period of record. But we focus on calibration period, the last 20 or 30 years. And a lot of times when we look at those graphs, depending on where the gauge was, they're right off. It's pretty easy to exactly match pretty much those flows, because again, we're just taking gauge records, subtracting withdrawals, adding back in discharges, and it all should add up. We've never tried to figure out a range of uncertainty around that. We've always just looked at the results and said, this looks reasonable. We're comfortable using this as a planning tool. We have done comparisons like 7 to 10 flows, so we focus on the low flows and look at the percent difference between actual 7 to 10s and model predicted 7 to 10s. And we can look at that percentage difference, and that gives us some idea of the uncertainty. We have not quantified it. Okay, it's 25% uncertainty. We've never done. I'm not a statistician. I'm not sure how to do that. So I can't answer your question. Yeah. Okay.
Kind of a good segue to that next slide, which I think we should.
Yeah.
We'll ruminate on for the next month. This month.
What data is missing? What data gaps we have? How can we improve upon our data collection analysis? Better informed. How can we maximize this data collection with stakeholders? Yeah. Yep. Okay, just looking ahead, we've got, and here's one on data gaps, so we can talk through these. Are there any gaps that we want to fill? Are these gaps? So there's a lot of questions there. Some suggestions about the watershed atlas, or a question, should we improve that? A question on groundwater resources. One here about collaboration, more collaboration, land use, carrying buffers, carrying water rights, and then water quality, which we generally need to stay away from, but it's setting us up for future phases. And then the more difficult decisions about regulation and legislation. So that's what's in store for September. So speaking of September, let me back up. I'm going to get you chapters 4 and 8 to start reviewing. I'll probably give you 2 or 3 weeks to encourage you to give me comments on those. Again, you can have more time if you need it, but they're fairly short chapters, so I encourage you to look at them when you receive them. By the next meeting, we may also give you chapters 5 and 6. Those are pretty technical, focused on the modeling. Chapter 5 is just the overview of the planning scenarios, and chapter 6 is introduction to water management strategies. That chapter just pulls a lot from previous river basin plans that were written, because again, we didn't have to really identify specific strategies in this basin to eliminate shortages. We didn't really have shortages. Nevertheless, we went through that exercise to identify which strategies we thought were worth of recommending, and that's what that chapter summarized. Kirk's going to pick up the development policy, regulatory, legislative recommendations. We may start working on the implementation plan, but I doubt we'll get to it. There's been a lot of great discussion on recommendations, and I expect that'll probably take up most of the time next month. Question we had is, came up during our planning team call, and let me look ahead to October too. Our planned meeting in October falls at the same time that Clemson has the South Carolina Water Resources Conference, so we can't have it that week. My first thought is just to push it back a week. So it would be not the 17th, but the 24th, 23rd. Be Wednesday, the 23rd. Y'all be in October. Would y'all be okay if we moved it to Wednesday, October 23rd?
I got a conflict with this.
Well, I'm trying to get everybody. I like the fact that you're here, because you're always a good representative of ag. If we don't have ag in the room, then I feel like we can't talk about some of the recommendations.
That whole week out.
No, I was to make something, I would move something. Yeah,
Got some on the 23rd.
You got something on 23rd?
I've got some on the 23rd.
Yeah, what about the week prior? It couldn't be Wednesday because the Upper Savannah meets that day, but it could be Tuesday or Thursday. Thursday. So what day would that be? Sorry.
So again,
So week prior to the.
I can do the 10, yeah. I said 10.
I can't do the 10th.
Okay, well, John's got September.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're talking about October now. So, yes, it wouldn't be, it'd be the 8th or 10th of October. Okay. How about the 8th?
We can't do the 8th.
I can't do the 8th. My son might be 32, but it's a perfect.
I can do the 10th.
What about the 22nd is PD,
22nd is PD.
24th?
23rd is Wednesday.
Yeah,
Oh,
some couple folks can't do that one. What about the
I
23rd?
actually have a conflict on the 23rd and the 24th. I'm available on the 22nd. You can come down to PD.
What about,
That's all.
what about moving another week down, the 30th of October?
I can do the 30th.
I can't do the 30th.
What about Jeff Phillips?
Jeff Phillips will be here next meeting, so if you want to have it twice.
Right.
Yeah, twice.
The 30th of October?
30th works.
30th works? Thumbs up? All right.
I got nothing scheduled that week.
What day? That's October 30th, so we'd be pushing it back 2 weeks.
Plenty of time to read all your chapters.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Yep. All right.
Here's my insomnia.
Okay. Okay, October 30th is what we plan on. There will be no meeting on the 18th or whatever date that was. Question on the next meeting. Way back, we had talked about potentially doing a canoe trip, kind of near the end of the process. The end of our process is going to fall in the winter months when you wouldn't be doing any canoeing or getting out on the water. My question is, does anybody have any?
That was that look, I saw that.
No.
Does anyone have any interest in doing some type of canoe trip in September? It would be in addition, well, probably in addition to a regular meeting, but not necessarily.
Depends on what.
Well, I do, John, and I talked to my sister, she lives on Saluda.
Yeah.
And a pretty easy 2-hour float trip, about 30 minutes from here. We can facilitate it probably and cook out after. Because as we get into policy, we might all need a drink or two. I'll try to do that to facilitate folks, facilitate it.
So
Yeah. So, and we need to see why we're all here. The Saluda is beautiful, even on that stretch. And before the time changes, it's a pretty easy flow, for most anyone. So I'd be glad to try to put that.
that'd be like, we're talking like the evening of the 18th.
Yeah,
Like
probably,
after the meeting, go.
Yeah, because everybody's here anyway.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, but whatever, we can do it at a different time too, if y'all want to do it, but that's.
Well, so, yeah, if you did it in conjunction with a meeting, that could be an optional trip for folks that want to do it. So just a quick show of hands, I know you have sparse details, but would that be of interest to you all in September of doing a short float trip after the meeting? All right.
So it's floating, there's no paddling involved.
Yeah, we can.
Depends on how long you want to be on that.
You want to get so right now.
We can get cheers and a bunch of beer and wait until the 19th to take out.
Depends on how much water you release.
Yeah, a day before. Yeah.
How far is it from here?
Put in it's gonna be like some fun. Which is. Have a little bit.
Yeah.
Casey, make it longer.
Out from here.
No, from the dam.
We could probably call it my sister's place, my dad, I'm along the way. And then I'll run a band or show, we'll figure that out. So we got a head count, and we get canoes or kayaks, Lakes,
Lance
so it all goes
parked
cash.
too, and then carpool to the meeting, and
Yeah.
the cars are already at the end.
We got plenty of time to plan.
That's not a bad.
Everybody's playing, we can figure out how to get close.
I'm here for that.
All right, we will, I'll get with you and we'll work on the specifics for that. I'm frustrated, Alan, I'm not gonna be here for it, but.
The river's always open, John.
Yeah. Do we need to supply canoe kayak?
Yeah, I can make more steel. I told somebody earlier, kayak about like an umbrella. Nobody really owns them. So we can borrow. I'll see what I can whip up.
Okay, Kevin's.
And I got a lot of friends yet.
I wonder if Kevin can help us with that too.
Kirk says he's happy to take your place in the canoe.
Yeah.
Plus, he says thanks for all the easy stuff next time.
Okay, all right, we'll work on that. We'll let everybody know what the plan is for the September 18th meeting.
But the 18th meeting is gonna be different.
If we can have it here, yeah. All right, that's all I have. Casey, you have any closing comments?
I think we covered.
All right, thank you, Tal, for your input.
Second, all those in favor, please.
All right.
Go.